My 12-year-old daughter came home from her aunt's house wearing a heavy black winter jacket in the middle of July. When I asked her to take it off, she flinched. She looked at the floor and whispered that Aunt Caroline made her wear it because her skin was not beautiful like her cousin Julie's. I gently unzipped the jacket. What I saw underneath made my blood run ice cold. Severe weeping chemical burns covered my baby's arms and face. But it was the dark adult-sized bruise marks wrapping around her wrist that told me the real story. She had been held down. I did not scream. I did not call the police. I did not even call my husband. Instead, I walked to the hall closet, grabbed a titanium golf club, and got into my car. When I kicked open my sister-in-law's front door 10 minutes later, she had no idea her entire world was about to end. My name is Rebecca, and I am 34 years old. I work as a forensic accountant for a major corporate firm. I track dirty money for a living. I look at ledgers and find the lies people try to hide. I dismantle corporate fraud with a calculator and a keen eye. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled my wealthy privileged in-laws' life piece by piece, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you believe a mother's wrath is the most dangerous force on earth. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood, I learned the value of hard work and resilience early on. I earned my degree through scholarships and sleepless nights. My husband David came from a very different world. He is 36, a financial manager born into a wealthy conservative white family that values appearances above all else. His parents, Richard and Patricia, have always looked down on me. But the true villain of the family has always been his younger sister Caroline. Caroline is 31 years old, a woman born into generational wealth and an unearned sense of superiority. She lives in a massive colonial house in an exclusively white upper-class suburb. She is obsessed with social standing, luxury brands, and physical perfection. To Caroline, I was just the hired help who somehow managed to marry her brother. She constantly made passive-aggressive comments about my clothes, my job, and my background. But the worst part was how she treated my daughter. Lily is a sweet, quiet girl. Like many teenagers, she struggles with her changing body and occasional breakouts. Caroline, on the other hand, considers herself a self-taught beauty expert. She recently set up an unlicensed medical spa in her basement, buying illegal laser machines and black market chemicals to treat her wealthy friends without proper medical credentials. When Lily walked through the door, shivering in that black jacket, the carefully maintained peace in our family completely shattered. "Mom, it hurts so much." Lily sobbed, her tiny body shaking against the bathroom counter as I gently ran cool water over her blistered skin. I asked her exactly what happened. Through her tears, she explained the nightmare she had just endured. Caroline had invited Lily over for a supposed spa day with her daughter Julie. Julie is exactly like her mother, arrogant and cruel. Caroline told Lily that her pores were disgusting. She said Lily's skin was defective and that she would be an embarrassment standing next to Julie at the upcoming country club dinner. Julie had stood in the corner laughing while Caroline applied an industrial-strength chemical peeling acid directly to my daughter's face and arms. When the acid started burning, Lily begged her to stop. She tried to squirm away and wash it off. That is when Caroline grabbed her wrists. She dug her acrylic nails into my daughter's skin with enough force to leave deep, dark bruises, forcing her to sit still while the acid ate through her epidermis. Caroline then forced Lily to put on a heavy winter jacket to hide the burns before sending her home, threatening her to keep quiet. I dried my daughter's tears with a soft towel. Her cheeks were bright red, blistering at the edges. The skin on her forearms looked raw, weeping clear fluid that soaked into the cotton of her shirt. This was not a minor reaction to a drugstore face wash. This was a severe chemical burn caused by professional-grade acid that should only be handled by licensed dermatologists in a clinical setting. Caroline was not a doctor. She was a bored, privileged housewife playing a dangerous game. Looking at Lily's bruised wrists, I felt a physical pain in my own chest. She is a child who apologizes when someone else bumps into her. She loves reading fantasy novels and baking cookies on weekends. She has never raised her voice in anger. To imagine her trapped in that basement room crying in pain while two people she trusted laughed at her ignited a primal, ferocious anger deep within my soul. No mother should ever have to wash chemical burns off her child's face, because of a family member's cruelty. I applied a thick layer of burn ointment and wrapped Lily's arms in sterile gauze from our first aid kit. I gave her pain medication and tucked her into my bed, putting on her favorite movie to distract her. I kissed her forehead and told her I would be right back. I walked downstairs to the hallway. I did not reach for my phone to call David. I knew exactly what would happen if I did. David has the backbone of a jellyfish when it comes to his family. He would answer his phone with an annoyed sigh. He would tell me that Lily was probably just exaggerating, that her skin was just sensitive, and that Caroline would never do something like that on purpose. He would urge me to calm down and wait for him to get home. He would try to manage my emotions instead of addressing his sister's abuse. I refused to let my daughter's trauma be swept under the rug for the sake of family harmony. In my line of work, everything must balance. Every credit must have an equal and opposite debit. Caroline had just taken something precious from me. She had stolen my daughter's safety, her comfort, and her trust. That was a massive debit on the ledger of our family dynamic. I was here to balance the books, and the cost of her debt was going to be astronomical. My entire career is built on finding discrepancies. When a corporation claims they are bankrupt, I find the offshore accounts they use to hide their wealth. I follow the paper trail. I look for the truth hidden beneath layers of deceit. Applying this mindset to my personal life was something I usually avoided. But today the forensic lens clicked into place. Caroline's pristine, wealthy image was a fraud. Her authority was a fraud. And I was going to audit her entire existence. I opened the hall closet. David plays golf every Sunday with his wealthy friends. He has a set of expensive titanium clubs. I reached past his customized driver and pulled out a heavy solid iron 9-iron. The cool metal felt grounding in my hand. I walked out the front door, locked it behind me, and got into my car. The drive to Caroline's house took 12 minutes. Those 12 minutes felt like an eternity and a fraction of a second all at once. I kept my eyes on the road, obeying every traffic law. I stopped at every red light. I used my turn signals. The radio was playing a soft pop song, but I could not hear the lyrics. All I could hear was Lily's shaky breathing. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The sky was painting itself in shades of orange and purple as the sun began to set over the affluent suburbs. People were walking their golden retrievers. Neighbors were chatting over white picket fences. It was a picture of suburban perfection, utterly oblivious to the violence that had just occurred in one of their pristine basements. I thought about all the years I had bitten my tongue to keep the peace. I thought about the holidays where I was forced to smile while Caroline insulted my career. I had tolerated her superiority complex for over a decade because she was my husband's sister. But the moment she put her hands on my child, the social contract was permanently voided. There would be no more polite smiles. There would be no more keeping the peace. I pulled into her neighborhood. The streets were lined with ancient oak trees and perfectly manicured lawns. Massive houses sat far back from the road, projecting an aura of untouchable wealth. Caroline's house always intimidated me when we visited for holidays. It was designed to make guests feel small. The towering columns, the perfectly symmetrical windows, the expensive landscaping. Today, it just looked like a Target. I parked my car in Caroline's circular driveway, right behind her shiny white luxury vehicle. I stepped out of my car, the golf club hanging loosely by my side. The evening air was warm, but I felt nothing but ice in my veins. I did not care about the security cameras I knew were watching me from the porch ceiling. I did not care if the neighbors were looking through their blinds. I marched up those steps with the singular focus of a predator. I walked up the paved brick pathway to her grand front entrance. She had a custom mahogany door with frosted glass panels that cost more than my first car. I did not ring the doorbell. I did not knock. I tightened my grip on the rubber handle of the golf club. I lifted my heavy boot and kicked the front door exactly beside the lock. The wood splintered with a loud crack, but the deadbolt held. I kicked it a second time, putting every ounce of my maternal rage into the heel of my boot. The door burst open, slamming violently against the interior wall of her pristine foyer. I stepped over the threshold, my boots leaving dirt marks on her imported Italian marble floor. The house was quiet for exactly 2 seconds before I heard Caroline's voice calling out from the basement stairs, demanding to know who was there. I did not answer. I walked straight toward the sound of her voice, dragging the metal head of the golf club along the floor, ready to introduce my sister-in-law to the consequences of her actions. Caroline appeared at the top of the basement staircase, wearing a matching cashmere lounge set and holding a glass of sparkling water with a slice of lemon. Her blonde hair was perfectly blown out. Her skin was flawlessly smooth, a testament to the thousands of dollars she poured into her own vanity. When she saw me standing in her ruined foyer with a golf club, she did not look afraid. She actually smirked. She tilted her head, giving me the same condescending look she had used for years whenever I wore a brand she did not recognize or spoke about my grueling work hours. "What is wrong with you, Rebecca?" Caroline asked, her voice dripping with lazy arrogance. "Are you having a meltdown because Lily came home crying? I told you before, your daughter is simply too sensitive. Her skin is flawed. I was doing her a favor by trying to fix it. Julie never complains when we do our spa days. You should be thanking me instead of throwing a tantrum like a commoner." I did not say a single word. I did not scream. I did not demand an apology. Explaining human decency to a sociopath is a waste of breath. I bypassed her completely. I bumped my shoulder hard against hers as I moved past her, forcing her to spill her sparkling water down the front of her expensive cashmere sweater. She let out a sharp gasp of indignation, but I was already walking down the carpeted stairs into her basement. Caroline hurried down the stairs right behind me, her voice rising in pitch as she demanded to know what I was doing. Her basement had been entirely remodeled. It did not look like a space under a suburban home. It looked like a high-end clinical dermatology office in Beverly Hills. The walls were painted a sterile, calming white. Soft ambient lighting glowed from the ceiling. Soothing classical music played from hidden speakers. In the center of the room sat 2 white leather adjustable treatment beds. Surrounding those beds was the real prize, the equipment. As a forensic accountant, I am intimately familiar with the cost of medical assets. I recognized the machines immediately. In the corner sat a commercial-grade non-ablative fractional laser system. Next to it was an intense pulsed light therapy machine. Against the far wall rested a professional radiofrequency microneedling device. None of these were consumer-grade toys. These were restricted medical devices that required a specialized medical license to purchase and operate. Caroline had no such license. She had acquired them through black market medical suppliers or corrupt physicians looking to make a quick profit. The total value of the equipment in this room easily exceeded $200,000. This was her pride and joy. This was the illegal empire she used to scam wealthy housewives who wanted to save a few $100s on cosmetic procedures while sipping champagne in a basement. I walked directly to the fractional laser system. It was a sleek white tower with a digital touchscreen interface and a delicate articulated arm. Caroline stood a few feet away, crossing her arms over her chest, still believing she held the power in this dynamic. "Get out of my house before I call David and tell him his wife has lost her mind," Caroline warned. I raised the heavy iron golf club high above my right shoulder. I adjusted my grip, planted my boots firmly on her pristine hardwood floor, and swung with every ounce of strength I possessed. The metal head of the club collided with the digital touchscreen of the laser machine. The sound was deafening. Glass shattered outward in a spectacular explosion of sharp fragments. The expensive digital display crumpled inward, dying instantly as sparks sparked from the internal wiring. I did not stop. I brought the club back around and swung a second time, striking the delicate articulated laser arm. The metal bent with a satisfying crunch, rendering the $80,000 machine completely useless. Caroline let out a blood-curdling shriek. "Are you psychotic?" she screamed, her hands flying to her face. "Stop it! That cost more than you make in a year." I ignored her. I took 2 steps to the left, positioning myself in front of the intense pulsed light therapy machine. I raised the club and brought it down like a hammer. The heavy iron smashed through the top casing, destroying the cooling mechanism and the intricate light filters inside. A hiss of compressed air escaped from the broken machine. I swung again, destroying the handpiece resting in its cradle. Plastic shattered. Wires tore apart. The pristine, clinical environment was rapidly turning into a chaotic wreckage of expensive debris. "Stop!" Caroline shrieked, launching herself forward. She grabbed my arm, trying to pull me away. I shoved her back violently. She stumbled and fell onto one of her white leather treatment beds, her eyes wide with genuine terror. She was finally realizing that her status and her wealth could not protect her from a mother who had just held her burned child. "You stay right there," I commanded, pointing the tip of the golf club directly at her face. My voice was dangerously low, carrying a lethal calmness that made her freeze entirely. "You put your hands on my daughter. You held her down. You burned her." "I am just balancing the books, Caroline." I turned my attention to the glass display cases lining the back wall. They were filled with high-end serums, chemical peels, and medical-grade exfoliants. I swept the golf club across the top shelf in a brutal horizontal arc. Glass bottles crashed to the floor. Vials of expensive hyaluronic acid and vitamin C serum shattered, mixing into a sticky, fragrant puddle on the hardwood. I systematically destroyed every shelf, shattering hundreds of glass containers until the entire back wall was a wet, sparkling mess of ruined product. Caroline was hyperventilating now. She scrambled backward on the treatment bed, pulling her knees to her chest. "I am calling the police," she sobbed hysterically, fumbling in her pocket for her smartphone. "You are going to prison. I am pressing charges. You broke into my house and destroyed my business. You are a violent criminal." I lowered the golf club, letting the metal head rest on the floor amidst the broken glass. I turned to the wooden utility cart next to the bed where she had been sitting. This was her active workstation. I pulled open the top drawer. Inside, amidst sterile gauze and applicators, I found what I was looking for. It was a dark amber glass bottle. The label was completely blank save for a small warning symbol and some text written in a foreign language. It had no FDA approval markings. It had no list of ingredients. It was an industrial-strength chemical compound purchased illegally from an overseas black market supplier. This was the exact bottle she had used to burn my 12-year-old daughter. I picked up the bottle and turned to face Caroline. She had her phone pressed to her ear, frantically waiting for the emergency dispatcher to answer. "Call them," I said. My voice cut through the room like a surgical blade. Caroline paused, the phone hovering near her cheek. "Call them," I repeated, stepping closer to her, holding the dark amber bottle up so she could see it clearly. "Let's see who goes to jail longer, me for property damage, or you for practicing medicine without a license and child abuse." Caroline froze. The blood completely drained from her face, leaving her looking sickly pale. She stared at the bottle in my hand, then looked at the destroyed medical equipment surrounding her. The gears in her head finally started turning. As a forensic accountant, I knew the law intimately, and I knew she suddenly realized the massive legal peril she was in. "If the police arrive, they will see this room," I explained slowly, ensuring she absorbed every single word. "They will see the restricted medical devices you have no license to operate. They will confiscate this illegal, undocumented chemical acid you smuggled into the country. And then I will hand them the medical report from the emergency room, documenting the third-degree chemical burns and restraint bruises you inflicted on a minor. So please, Caroline, hit send. Call the police. I would love to watch them put you in handcuffs." Caroline slowly lowered her phone. Her hands were shaking violently. The arrogant smirk she had worn at the top of the stairs was completely gone, replaced by the pathetic realization that her entire life was balancing on a knife's edge. She was a coward, and cowards fold the moment they are confronted with actual consequences. She opened her mouth to speak, perhaps to beg or to negotiate, but a sudden noise interrupted her. Heavy footsteps echoed on the hardwood floor upstairs. The front door had been left wide open after I kicked it in. "Caroline, Rebecca." A male voice shouted from the foyer. It was David. He must have seen my car parked aggressively in the driveway alongside the splintered front door. His heavy footsteps pounded rapidly down the basement stairs. David burst into the room, his eyes wild with panic. He was wearing his expensive golf polo and tailored khaki shorts, a stark contrast to the scene of absolute devastation before him. He stopped dead in his tracks. He looked at the shattered glass covering the floor. He looked at the mangled $80,000 laser machines. He looked at the golf club resting in my hand, and then he looked at his sister, who was sobbing uncontrollably on the treatment bed. Any decent father would have checked his phone. Any decent father would have noticed the 5 missed calls from the school nurse over the years, or the fact that his daughter had just come home severely injured. But David did not ask about Lily. He did not ask why I was holding a bottle of unmarked acid. He did not ask what had driven his wife to this point of extreme destruction. His eyes locked onto the ruined laser equipment. The color drained from his face, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated financial panic. "Rebecca, what have you done?" David screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. He lunged forward, waving his hands frantically at the destroyed machines. "Do you have any idea how much this costs? You are insane. You just ruined her business." I looked at the man I had married 10 years ago. He was hyperventilating over a pile of broken plastic and shattered glass, completely oblivious to the horrific truth of what had just occurred in this very room. He did not ask why I was holding a bottle of unmarked chemicals. He did not ask why my chest was heaving with exertion. Most damning of all, he did not ask about our daughter. His only concern was the monetary value of his sister's illegal equipment. In the ledger of our marriage, that reaction was a fatal deficit. It was an unrecoverable loss. I did not scream back at him. I simply opened my hand and let the heavy iron golf club drop to the floor. It landed with a loud clatter against the ruined casing of the laser machine. I kept a tight grip on the dark amber glass bottle. I walked right past David. He reached out to grab my shoulder, his face twisted in rage, but I turned my head and gave him a look so utterly devoid of humanity that he instantly dropped his hand. I walked up the basement stairs, stepped over the splintered remains of the front door, and got back into my car. I drove home with a singular, unbreakable focus. When I walked into my house, I went straight to my bedroom. Lily was lying exactly where I had left her, shivering under the blankets, despite the warm summer evening. Her face was swollen, the red, angry blisters, weeping clear fluid onto my pillowcases. I gathered her into my arms, wrapping a soft cotton blanket around her trembling shoulders. I carried my 12-year-old child out to the car, buckled her into the passenger seat, and drove straight to the emergency room at the regional medical center. The stark fluorescent lights of the hospital lobby cast a harsh glare over the triage area. I carried Lily to the front desk, bypassing the waiting room chairs. The triage nurse took one look at Lily's blistering face and the raw, weeping skin on her arms, and immediately hit a button on her desk. Within seconds, we were rushed through double doors into a sterile trauma bay. A pediatric burn specialist arrived less than 5 minutes later. He was a tall, serious man with a gentle bedside manner. He carefully peeled back the gauze I had applied, his jaw tightening as he examined the extent of the damage. He asked me what had happened. I handed him the dark amber bottle and repeated exactly what Lily had told me. I explained that her aunt had forcibly applied this unknown industrial acid to her skin, holding her down when she tried to resist. The doctor carefully examined Lily's wrists. The dark adult-sized bruises were forming a distinct pattern, the unmistakable shape of fingers pressing violently into delicate skin. "These are not allergic reactions," the doctor said, his voice dropping to a low, grim register. "These are third-degree chemical burns. The acid has completely destroyed the epidermis and is severely damaging the underlying dermis layers. She will require specialized burn treatment, aggressive pain management, and extensive follow-up care to prevent permanent severe scarring." He paused, looking from Lily's bruised wrists to my face. "The bruising pattern indicates forceful, intentional restraint. Given the nature of these injuries and the fact that they were inflicted by an adult family member, I am legally obligated to trigger an immediate Child Protective Services report. A social worker is already on her way down here, and we will be notifying local law enforcement." I nodded once. "Do whatever you have to do to protect my daughter," I said. I want it all documented. Every single burn, every single bruise. While the medical team administered intravenous pain medication to Lily and began the agonizing process of cleaning and dressing her burns, I stood in the corner of the trauma bay, my arms crossed over my chest. My phone vibrated endlessly in my pocket. I knew who was calling. I ignored it. 30 minutes later, the heavy double doors of the emergency department swung open. Richard and Patricia, my wealthy conservative in-laws, marched down the hallway. They looked entirely out of place in the sterile, chaotic environment of a public hospital. Patricia was wearing her country club dinner attire, a string of pearls resting against her collarbone. Richard wore a tailored blazer, his face flushed with righteous indignation. David trailed behind them looking panicked and furious. They did not rush to the trauma bay window to check on their granddaughter. They did not ask a passing nurse for an update on Lily's condition. Instead, they spotted me standing near the nurse's station and marched directly toward me, their expressions tight with anger. Patricia reached me first. She did not offer a hug. She did not offer a word of comfort. She pointed a manicured finger at me. "You are making an absolute spectacle, Rebecca," Patricia hissed, keeping her voice low to avoid drawing the attention of the hospital staff. "David just told us what you did to Caroline's beautiful basement. You destroyed her business. And now you have dragged Lily to an emergency room to play the victim over a simple spa reaction." I stared at her, genuinely astounded by the sheer magnitude of her delusion. "A simple spa reaction," I repeated, my voice dangerously calm. "She has third-degree chemical burns, Patricia. Your daughter held her down and poured black market acid on a 12-year-old child." "She has always had terribly sensitive skin," Patricia retorted, waving her hand dismissively. "Caroline was just trying to help the poor girl. You know Lily struggles with her complexion. Caroline was doing her a favor, giving her a treatment that normally costs thousands of dollars. But of course you lack the refinement to understand that. You are blowing a minor allergic reaction completely out of proportion and tearing this family apart in the process." Richard stepped forward, imposing and arrogant. "We will write a check for the medical bill," he stated, as if this entire nightmare was a simple transaction. "But this nonsense stops right now. David told us you took the bottle. Give it back to us, and we will consider not pressing charges against you for the malicious destruction of property at Caroline's house. You have done enough damage tonight. Rebecca, it is time to go home and act like a rational adult." I looked at the three of them. My husband and his parents standing united to protect a sociopath who had just permanently scarred a child. They were not a family. They were a syndicate of enablers. They operated on the belief that their wealth and their social standing gave them immunity from consequence. They thought they could simply write a check and gaslight me into silence. "I do not have the bottle," I said, maintaining direct eye contact with Richard. "I gave it to the pediatric burn specialist. It is currently being analyzed by the hospital laboratory for the police report. Furthermore, Child Protective Services has been notified." The color instantly drained from Patricia's face. Her pearls seemed to clatter loudly as her chest heaved. "You called the police on your own sister-in-law," she gasped, stepping back as if I had struck her. "You called Child Services. Do you have any idea the scandal this will cause? The country club will hear about this. The board of directors will hear about this." "I did not call them," I corrected coldly. "The doctors called them. Because when a child presents with third-degree burns and restraint bruises, the law mandates an investigation. Your daughter is a criminal, Patricia, and no amount of money is going to fix this." David grabbed my arm, his grip painfully tight. He yanked me away from his parents, pulling me around the corner into a quiet, deserted stretch of the hospital hallway, far out of sight from the nurse's station and the trauma bay. His face was twisted with a terrifying mixture of panic, desperation, and cruelty. "You are going to fix this," David growled, backing me against the cold cinder block wall. "You are going to walk back in there, and you are going to tell that social worker it was a massive misunderstanding. You will say Lily knocked the bottle over by accident. You will say the bruises are from her falling, and Caroline trying to catch her. You will drop this entire police report right now." I shoved his hand off my arm. "I will do no such thing," I stated firmly. "Your sister tortured our daughter. She made a mistake," David shot back, his voice rising in panic. "But she is my sister, Rebecca. She is family. And if this gets out, if she gets arrested, her life is over. My parents will be humiliated. I am not letting you destroy my family over this. Your family." I repeated, the realization hitting me with absolute clarity. "Lily and I are not your family. We are just accessories to your perfect suburban image." David leaned in close, crowding my personal space. His eyes were wide and frantic, but his words were calculated and sharp. "Listen to me very carefully, Rebecca. If you do not drop this, if you do not tell the authorities it was a terrible accident, I will ruin you." I did not blink. I waited for him to show his entire hand. "I will call my family's legal team right now," David threatened, his voice dropping to a vicious whisper. I will show them the photos Caroline just took of her destroyed basement. I will show the judge the thousands of dollars in property damage you committed in a fit of rage with a golf club. I will tell the court that you had a violent psychotic break. I will say you are a danger to yourself and others. I will file for full emergency custody of Lily tomorrow morning. And with my family's money and your documented violent outburst, no judge will ever let you see her again. You will lose your daughter, Rebecca. Now walk back in there and drop the charges. I stared at the man whose ring I wore on my finger. In my profession, I evaluate risk. I assess leverage. Davitt was a coward, but a coward backed by millions of dollars is a dangerous adversary. He was absolutely right about one thing. I had taken a golf club to his sister's property. I had caused hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages. His family had the best defense attorneys in the state on retainer. If I fought him right now in this hallway with no preparation and a documented trail of property destruction, they would paint me as an unhinged, violent woman. They would drag my name through the mud and they would use their wealth to bleed me dry in family court. I could lose custody. I could lose the only thing that mattered to me. I took a deep breath, forcing my racing heart to slow down. I needed to pivot. I needed to become the compliant, hysterical wife they expected me to be. I let my shoulders slump. I forced tears to well up in my eyes, letting my voice tremble perfectly. Okay, I whispered, looking down at the linoleum floor. Okay, Davitt, you win. I will fix it. A sickening smile of triumph spread across his face. He actually reached out and patted my shoulder, praising me for finally being reasonable. I walked back into the trauma bay where the police officer and the social worker were waiting. Every step felt like swallowing broken glass. I looked at the officer and delivered the most difficult lie of my life. I told them I had overreacted. I said Lily had accidentally knocked over a bottle of strong exfoliating acid while Caroline was out of the room. I claimed the bruises were from Caroline frantically trying to drag Lily to the sink to wash the chemicals off. The police officer frowned, his eyes narrowing with clear suspicion. The social worker looked from me to Lily, who was thankfully sedated and sleeping. They knew I was lying. Victims of domestic abuse and intimidation recant their stories every single day in hospitals just like this one. But without my cooperation, and with the child unable to testify due to sedation, their hands were tied. I signed a temporary waiver, effectively stalling the immediate criminal investigation. The moment the ink dried on the paper, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Richard and Patricia walked back in, practically glowing with smug satisfaction. Patricia adjusted her pearl necklace, sighing loudly about how exhausting unnecessary drama can be. Richard clapped Davitt on the back, congratulating his son on handling the situation like a true patriarch. They did not even glance at the hospital bed where my daughter lay wrapped in sterile bandages. They were entirely focused on their victory, on the preservation of their pristine reputation. We took Lily home the next morning. The doctors prescribed a grueling regimen of burn creams, pain management pills, and strict instructions to avoid sunlight. My daughter whimpered with every application of the thick, sterile ointment. Her beautiful face was marred by angry, peeling scabs that cracked and bled whenever she tried to smile. She asked me why Aunt Caroline was not in jail. Looking into her innocent, tear-filled eyes, I felt my heart shatter all over again. I smoothed her hair and promised her that bad people always pay for their crimes eventually. I just needed her to be brave for a little while longer, telling her that Mommy had a plan. For the next 3 days I played my part flawlessly. I cooked dinner. I kept my head down. I apologized to Davitt for losing my temper, attributing my golf club rampage to severe maternal panic and temporary insanity. He soaked up my apologies with disgusting arrogance. He told me he was gracious enough to convince Caroline not to sue me for the damages, reminding me daily of how lucky I was to be part of his generous family. He acted as though he was a benevolent king, granting mercy to a disobedient peasant. I nodded. I cried on cue and I thanked him repeatedly for his unwavering patience. Then came the ultimate insult. On Sunday evening, while I was carefully changing Lily's bandages and listening to her cry from the stinging pain, my phone buzzed. It was an alert from a social media app. Caroline had made a public post. She uploaded a beautifully filtered photograph of herself standing in her sprawling backyard, holding a glass of wine and smiling serenely at the camera. The caption beneath the photo was a masterclass in narcissistic delusion. It read, "This week taught me the true meaning of grace. Family can be challenging and misunderstandings happen. But choosing forgiveness over anger is the only way to live a beautiful, blessed life. Sending love and healing energy to my sweet niece. We are all learning and growing together." She had restricted the comments, so only her wealthy, sycophantic friends could reply. They flooded her post with heart emojis praising her big heart, her maturity, and her stunning resilience. She was branding herself as a saint. She had chemically burned a child, evaded a felony charge through blackmail, and was now harvesting social media sympathy points from her country club friends. Reading those words, a cold, dark void opened in the center of my chest. There is a specific kind of rage that burns so hot it completely bypasses emotion and turns directly into pure, unadulterated focus. They thought they had won. They thought I was just a weak working-class girl who had surrendered to their superior wealth and influence. They completely forgot what I do for a living. I am not a housewife. I am not a subordinate. I am a forensic accountant. I dismantle criminal enterprises by following the invisible trails of money they leave behind. And Caroline's illegal medical spa was definitely a criminal enterprise. Monday morning arrived with crisp, mechanical precision. David woke up early whistling a cheerful tune as he knotted his expensive silk tie. He kissed my cheek, told me to take good care of Lily, and walked out the front door to head to his financial management firm. I stood by the front window watching his luxury sedan back out of the driveway and disappear down the street. The second his car turned the corner, the defeated, weeping wife vanished. My tears dried instantly. My posture straightened. The performance was over and the real work was about to begin. I walked into my home office and locked the door behind me. I sat down at my desk and opened my secure, encrypted work laptop. The screen illuminated my face with a harsh blue glow. I cracked my knuckles, taking a deep breath of the quiet, empty house. The silence was my canvas now. David and his family had leveraged their power to silence me. They had used the threat of expensive litigation and custody battles to back me into a corner. But they made a fatal miscalculation. They assumed their money was an impenetrable shield that would forever protect their toxic behavior. In my world, money is never a shield. Money is a map. Every dollar spent leaves a digital footprint. Every illegal laser machine imported from overseas requires a customs declaration. Every bottle of restricted chemical acid requires a wire transfer. Criminals always think they are smarter than the system, but their greed always makes them sloppy. David was a financial manager. He handled all of Caroline's business accounts. He was the one who structured her limited liability company. He was the one who filed her taxes. He had stood in that hospital hallway and threatened to take my child away from me, just to protect his sister's illegal income stream. He chose his blood over his own daughter's safety. He chose his family's pristine social standing over doing what was morally and legally right. That choice was going to cost him everything he held dear: his career, his reputation, and his freedom. They were all about to be systematically dismantled by the woman he underestimated. If Caroline was running an illegal, unlicensed medical spa out of her basement, David was the one laundering the revenue. I had the passwords to our shared home network. I opened a specialized data extraction program, bypassing the basic firewall David had installed on our home router. I began pinging the internet protocol addresses associated with his personal devices. I was not just going to report Caroline for a single instance of child abuse. I was going to tear down their entire financial empire. I was going to find every hidden account, every fraudulent tax return, and every illegal purchase. I was going to build a federal case, so airtight that no amount of country club influence could save them. I typed the first line of code, watching the data packets begin to flood my screen. My eyes locked securely on the digital blood trail my husband had so carelessly left behind for me to find. David considered himself a master of finance, a gatekeeper of wealth for his elite clients, but his personal cybersecurity was laughably arrogant. He used the same variations of his own birthday and his sister's name for his encrypted folders, a rookie mistake born from pure narcissism. I did not even need my advanced decryption tools to breach his primary hidden drive. A simple brute force algorithm cracked his password within 45 seconds. The digital vault swung open, laying bare the rotting foundation of our marriage and the extent of his loyalty to Caroline. I leaned closer to the monitor, my fingers flying across the keyboard as I downloaded years of bank statements, tax filings, and limited liability company registrations. I expected to find large recent withdrawals. I assumed he was moving liquid assets into a private account to retain high-powered defense attorneys for Caroline, just in case my temporary waiver failed to stop the police investigation. I thought I was simply looking for a legal defense fund. The truth I uncovered over the next 3 hours was infinitely worse. It was a betrayal so profound and systematic that it made my physical heart ache in my chest. I started by mapping the cash flow of Caroline's business, cross-referencing it with our personal joint accounts. A massive discrepancy glared at me from the spreadsheet. There was a sudden massive influx of capital into Caroline's holding company exactly 14 months ago. $250,000 had materialized out of thin air to purchase the commercial-grade fractional laser system and the intense pulsed light therapy machine I had smashed with the golf club. Caroline did not have that kind of liquid capital. Her husband had cut her off financially after her previous failed business ventures. The money had to come from David. I traced the routing numbers backward. I followed the digital thread through a labyrinth of shell companies David had set up to obscure the origin of the funds. He was good masking the transfers as consulting fees and private loans, but forensic accounting is about finding the one thread that unravels the entire sweater. I found the origin point and the breath completely left my lungs. It was a direct wire transfer from a heavily penalized withdrawal. The account number matched a document I kept locked in my own safe. It was Lily's college savings plan. For 12 years, I had deposited a portion of every single paycheck into that account. I had skipped vacations, drove an old car, and denied myself basic luxuries to ensure my daughter would never have to take out crushing student loans like I did. I had built that fund dollar by agonizing dollar, celebrating every milestone, securing her future and her freedom. David had liquidated it entirely. He had drained $150,000 from his own daughter's educational future. He did it with a few clicks of a mouse, incurring massive early withdrawal penalties from the federal government, all to inject untraceable cash into his sister's illegal medical spa. He had stolen the foundation of Lily's future to buy Caroline a new toy. I pressed my hands against my mouth, stifling a scream of pure visceral agony. My vision blurred as I stared at the zero balance on the screen. The absolute betrayal was suffocating. He had looked me in the eye for over a year, smiling when I talked about touring university campuses with Lily, knowing full well he had already emptied her accounts. But the math still did not add up. The laser equipment cost more than the stolen college fund. David needed another $100,000 to cover the remaining balance and the initial setup costs of the basement clinic. I dove deeper into the ledgers, my grief instantly converting into a lethal, hyper-focused rage. I searched the county property records and cross-referenced them with our primary mortgage statements. There it was, hiding in plain sight under a secondary lending institution David used for his clients. He had taken out a second mortgage on our family home. The house we bought together, the roof over our daughter's head, was now heavily leveraged. I pulled up the loan origination documents. They required both spouses' signatures. I stared at the digital copy of the contract. There on the bottom line was my signature. It was a flawless forgery, likely lifted from a tax document and digitally superimposed onto the loan agreement. David had committed wire fraud and identity theft against his own wife. He had risked our shelter, our financial stability, and our daughter's education to finance a criminal enterprise for a sister who actively despised us. The sheer scale of his complicity was staggering. David was not just protecting Caroline from a child abuse charge out of misguided sibling loyalty. He was protecting his own financial survival. If Caroline went to prison and her illegal clinic was seized by the authorities, David would default on the fraudulent second mortgage. He would be exposed for embezzling the college funds. I was protecting his sister because he was a co-conspirator in a massive financial crime. I opened a new encrypted server on my laptop and began meticulously copying every single document, every forged signature, every wire transfer receipt, Every shell company registration went into a secure cloud drive that David could never access. I was building a guillotine made of paperwork, and I was going to make sure the blade was perfectly sharp. As the files transferred, I opened the expense reports for Caroline's business operations. If David was managing her books, he would have records of their supply chain. I needed to know exactly what Caroline had poured onto my daughter's skin. I found the purchase orders buried in a folder mislabeled as office cleaning supplies. I opened the digital invoices and read the shipping manifests. They were not buying medical-grade chemicals from authorized pharmaceutical distributors in the United States. Licensed suppliers require proof of a medical director and active clinic credentials, none of which Caroline possessed. Instead, David had set up a recurring purchase order with a wholesale chemical manufacturer based overseas in a region notorious for zero quality control. I translated the chemical composition listed on the shipping manifest. It was an industrial trichloroacetic acid compound, a highly unstable and dangerous corrosive agent. Medical professionals use highly diluted neutralized versions of this acid for controlled skin peels. The invoices showed Caroline was buying it at full industrial concentration because it was 90% cheaper than the regulated medical alternatives. She was maximizing her profit margins by using toxic unregulated chemicals on her wealthy clients. I stared at the invoice, the final piece of the puzzle sliding into place with a sickening clarity. The acid used on Lily was bought from a cheap black market supplier. It was meant to clean industrial machinery, not human skin. Caroline had slathered it onto my child's face simply because it was cheaper, and David had processed the payment. David had literally sacrificed his daughter's future, stealing her college fund, and risking her home to fund his sister's vanity project. And when that vanity project resulted in his daughter being permanently scarred with black market chemicals, he had threatened to take my child away just to protect the profit margin. He traded Lily's physical safety and educational future so Caroline could play doctor in her basement. I closed the laptop, the screen going black. The silence of the house pressed in on me again. I was sitting in a home that was secretly mortgaged to the hilt, married to a man who was a financial predator, and surrounded by an extended family of enabling sociopaths. They had taken everything from me. They had burned my child, stolen her future, forged my name, and forced me into submission in a hospital hallway. A strange, absolute calm washed over me. It was the calm of a woman who realizes she has absolutely nothing left to lose. They thought they had trapped me. They thought I was a helpless mother, desperate to keep custody of her child, terrified of their expensive lawyers and country club influence. They did not realize they had just handed a loaded weapon to the one person who knew exactly how to dismantle their entire world. I stood up from the desk. I walked to the window and looked out at the pristine, wealthy neighborhood. David would be home in a few hours, expecting to find his broken, obedient wife cooking dinner. I would give him exactly what he wanted. I would smile, I would serve him food, I would ask about his day. I would be the perfect submissive partner. I would let him believe he had won, because a confident enemy is a careless enemy. I walked into the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The tears were gone. The fear was gone. I was no longer just a mother protecting her cub. I was the executioner, and the trial was already over. The verdict had been written in their own bank statements. My first priority was my daughter. I walked softly down the hallway, the hardwood floor cool beneath my bare feet. I gently pushed open the door to Lily's bedroom. The room was bathed in the soft blue light of her bedside lamp. She was asleep, her breathing shallow and uneven, occasionally interrupted by a soft whimper of pain. Her face was heavily bandaged, and the exposed edges of her skin looked angry and inflamed. I stood over her, feeling a fierce, protective surge radiate through my bones. Suddenly, the sharp vibration of a cell phone broke the silence. The device was sitting on Lily's nightstand, lighting up repeatedly with incoming notifications. I picked it up quickly, wanting to silence it before it woke her. The screen illuminated my face. What I saw on the lock screen made my jaw clench so hard my teeth ached. The messages were from Julie, Caroline's 12-year-old daughter. They came in a rapid, relentless stream. I unlocked the phone, swiping through the notification banner. Julie had sent over a dozen texts in the span of 5 minutes. She called Lily a freak. She typed that Lily looked like a monster and that everyone at school was going to laugh at her ruined face. Julie even sent manipulated grotesque images she had found on the internet, claiming this was how Lily would look for the rest of her life. She finished the barrage of abuse by saying her mother was right that Lily was defective and deserved to be burned. I stared at the glowing screen, the sheer unfiltered malice of the messages washing over me. Caroline was not just a narcissist. She was actively raising a miniature version of herself, teaching her daughter to weaponize cruelty against her own family. A sudden, overwhelming urge to hurl the phone against the wall seized me. I wanted to drive back to that house and inflict a very different kind of pain on the people raising such a vicious child. But I forced myself to exhale. Violence would only give them the ammunition they needed to take Lily away from me. I needed to be smarter. I needed to be absolutely flawless in my execution. I blocked Julie's number immediately. I went into the phone settings and permanently deleted the entire message thread, ensuring Lily would never have to see those vile words when she woke up. I wiped the device clean of the toxicity, placed it back on the nightstand, and tucked the blanket tighter around my daughter's shoulders. My anger was no longer a hot, uncontrollable flame. It had condensed into a block of solid ice. I was going to ruin them. An hour later, I heard the heavy thud of the front door closing. Davit was home. I walked downstairs, pasting a look of subdued obedience onto my face. I found him in the kitchen, loosening his expensive silk tie. He looked tense, his eyes darting toward me, as if expecting another explosive argument. Instead, I approached him quietly. I kept my head slightly bowed, playing the role of the defeated, submissive wife he so desperately wanted me to be. I asked him if he wanted me to heat up his dinner. Davit blinked clearly, disarmed by my docile behavior. He let out a long, heavy sigh of relief, his posture relaxing immediately. He patted my arm, a gesture so patronizing it took every ounce of my willpower not to break his wrist. He told me he was glad I had finally come to my senses and realized the gravity of my actions. He ate his dinner in silence while I washed the dishes, scrubbing the porcelain plates until my hands were raw. When he finished, he pushed his plate away and cleared his throat. He announced that he had to leave straight from work tomorrow evening. Richard and Patricia had called a mandatory family meeting at their estate. He explained that they needed to formulate a unified strategy to handle the fallout from the hospital, ensuring the police report was buried permanently. I nodded meekly, telling him I understood and that I would stay home to care for Lily. Davit smiled, completely satisfied with his dominance. He had no idea he had just handed me the keys to his own destruction. The next morning, after Davit drove off to his financial firm, I immediately went to work. I drove to a specialized electronics store located 2 towns over, ensuring I was far outside my usual geographical footprint. I paid in cash. I purchased a high-definition voice-activated micro-audio recorder. It was no larger than a standard USB flash drive, equipped with an extended battery life and a highly sensitive omnidirectional microphone designed to pick up whispers across a large room. I returned home and retrieved Davit's primary work briefcase from his home office. It was a custom-made Italian leather messenger bag he took everywhere, especially to important meetings with his father. I took my sewing kit from the hall closet. With the precision of a surgeon, I used a seam ripper to carefully open a 2-inch section of the thick interior lining at the very bottom of the bag. I slipped the micro recorder inside, securing it to the internal canvas, with a piece of double-sided tape to prevent it from rattling. I then took a needle and heavy black thread, meticulously stitching the lining back together. I matched the original stitch pattern perfectly. When I finished, the seam was entirely invisible. The briefcase looked untouched. Davit came home briefly that afternoon to change his suit before heading to his parents' house. I watched him grab the leather briefcase by the handle, completely unaware that he was carrying a wire directly into the heart of his family's criminal conspiracy. I spent the evening sitting in the dark of my home office watching the clock tick by. The waiting was the most agonizing part of the process. I tracked his location through the shared family phone plan, watching his digital avatar rest steadily at Richard and Patricia's sprawling suburban estate. Hours passed. I imagined them sitting in their opulent dining room sipping expensive scotch, congratulating themselves on successfully intimidating a middle-class mother into silence. It was past 11 at night when Davit finally returned. He stumbled slightly as he walked through the front door, the strong scent of aged whiskey preceding him. He was in excellent spirits, humming a quiet tune as he dropped the leather briefcase onto the entryway table. He came upstairs, kissed my cheek with alcohol-soaked breath, and told me everything was handled. He fell asleep within 10 minutes, his heavy snores echoing through the master bedroom. I slipped out of bed, my bare feet making no sound on the carpet. I crept downstairs to the entryway table. I carried the leather briefcase into my locked home office. Under the bright glare of my desk lamp, I used the seam ripper to cut the black thread I had sewn just hours earlier. I extracted the micro recorder, feeling a surge of adrenaline as my fingers brushed the cold plastic casing. I plugged the device into my secure encrypted laptop. A single audio file popped up on the screen indicating 3 hours of continuous recording. I plugged in my noise-canceling headphones, pressed play, and closed my eyes. The audio quality was pristine. I could hear the clinking of ice cubes against crystal glasses. I could hear the sharp, arrogant tune of Richard's voice directing the conversation. I heard Patricia complaining about the stress this ordeal was putting on Caroline. Then the true depth of their depravity began to unfold. Caroline's voice pierced the recording, whining about the ruined medical equipment in her basement. She complained that she was losing thousands of dollars a week without her laser machines. Davitt responded quickly, reassuring her that he had already begun moving funds from his offshore holding accounts to quietly replace the inventory. But Caroline was not satisfied. Her voice grew tight with anxiety. She brought up the police report. She reminded them that the hospital had officially triggered a Child Protective Services investigation. Even with my coerced statement claiming it was an accident, Caroline was terrified that a persistent detective or an overzealous social worker might demand to inspect her basement spa. She realized that if law enforcement found the unmarked bottles of industrial acid, her medical fraud would be exposed. I held my breath as Richard spoke. His voice was cold, carrying the weight of a man accustomed to making other people's problems disappear. He stated that they needed a contingency plan. They needed a firewall between Caroline and the illegal chemicals. Davitt provided the solution. "Listen to me," Davitt said, his voice crystal clear on the recording. "If the police show up with a warrant, we need a scapegoat. We need someone who has direct access to the basement, someone who handles cleaning supplies, and someone nobody will believe." Caroline gasped softly, catching on immediately. "Rosa," she whispered. My stomach plummeted. Rosa was an undocumented immigrant woman from Guatemala who cleaned Caroline's massive house twice a week. She was a sweet, hardworking mother who sent most of her earnings back to her family. "Exactly." Davitt confirmed, his tone chillingly pragmatic. "Rosa cleans the spa room. She is undocumented. If the detectives start asking questions about the chemicals, you tell them Rosa brought those bottles from her home country. You say she claimed they were heavy-duty cleaning solvents. You tell the police she must have accidentally mixed them up with the spa products." Patricia chimed in, sounding genuinely relieved. "That is brilliant, Davitt. Who are the police going to believe, a prominent, wealthy homeowner or an illegal immigrant who barely speaks English?" "But what if Rosa denies it?" Caroline asked, a hint of nervousness remaining in her voice. Davitt let out a dark, cynical chuckle. "She will not deny it. If the police interrogate her, I will personally pull her aside. I will tell her that if she does not take the fall for a simple negligence charge, I will use my contacts to call Immigration and Customs Enforcement. I will have her deported, and she will never see her children in this country again. She will take the blame, Caroline. She has no money and no power. She is the perfect target." The recording captured the sound of glasses clinking together in a celebratory toast. They laughed. They literally laughed about destroying an innocent, vulnerable woman's life, tearing her away from her children, and throwing her into the federal deportation system, all to save Caroline's country club reputation. I paused the audio. I sat frozen in my office chair, my blood turning to liquid nitrogen. They were not just entitled snobs. They were absolute monsters. They viewed human beings as disposable collateral damage for their own comfort. Davitt was willing to ruin an impoverished mother's life to protect the profit margins of an illegal basement clinic. I saved the audio file to my encrypted drive, locking it behind multiple layers of security. The game had fundamentally changed. This was no longer just about property damage or a simple family dispute. This was a conspiracy to commit fraud, extortion, and the obstruction of a federal investigation. I looked at the glowing screen of my laptop. I had the financial ledgers proving Davitt stole Lily's college fund. I had the forged mortgage documents. I had the shipping manifests for the black market acid. And now I had crystal clear audio of a conspiracy to frame a vulnerable minority for a violent crime. Davitt had told me to be a rational adult. He had demanded I drop the charges to protect his family. I was going to do exactly what he asked. I was going to be incredibly rational. I was going to take every piece of evidence I had gathered, and I was going to hand-deliver it to the federal government. I did not trust the local police department. Richard played golf with the chief of police every second Sunday. Patricia hosted lavish charity luncheons with local judges and county prosecutors. In a small affluent suburb, wealth buys a terrifying amount of blind loyalty. Handing local authorities a case against their most prominent donors would be a fatal mistake. The evidence would mysteriously vanish into a bureaucratic void. The investigation would hit endless roadblocks. I needed a jurisdiction that did not care about Richard and Patricia's country club memberships. I needed the federal government. As a forensic accountant, I know exactly what federal prosecutors need to secure a grand jury indictment. They do not want emotional pleas from an angry mother. They want unassailable paper trails. They want clean, undeniable ledgers that trace the exact flow of illicit funds from origin to execution. I spent the next 48 hours meticulously packaging the destruction of my in-laws into a comprehensive digital dossier. I created separate, heavily encrypted files for each federal agency, ensuring the narrative was logically impossible to dispute. For the Federal Bureau of Investigation, I compiled the wire fraud and money laundering evidence. I included the forged signature on the second mortgage of our family home, complete with metadata, proving the digital manipulation. I highlighted the exact dates and times Davitt liquidated Lily's college fund, cross-referencing those specific withdrawals with the subsequent deposits into Caroline's shell company accounts. I mapped the entire laundering process through the 3 dummy corporations Davitt had established to hide the cash flow. Finally, I attached the pristine audio recording of Davitt and Caroline conspiring to frame Rosa. That audio file elevated the case from simple financial crime to a coordinated conspiracy to obstruct justice and commit federal extortion. For the Food and Drug Administration, I built a separate, equally devastating file. I documented the international shipping manifests and customs declarations. I highlighted the purchase orders for the industrial-grade trichloroacetic acid. The FDA does not take kindly to uncredentialed suburban housewives importing restricted, corrosive chemicals and injecting them into the local populace under the guise of premium medical treatment. I matched the chemical import dates with the official emergency room medical reports documenting my daughter's third-degree burns. The correlation was absolute and undeniable. I did not mail the dossiers. I did not submit an anonymous online tip through a generic public portal. I used my professional network. I contacted a former colleague who now worked as a senior compliance officer for a federal financial crimes task force in Washington. I requested a secure encrypted drop link. When he asked what the files contained, I told him I had a fully mapped white-collar criminal enterprise involving interstate wire fraud, unlicensed medical operations, and federal conspiracy. The secure link hit my secure inbox 5 minutes later. I uploaded the files. I watched the progress bar inch across my screen, a slow, methodical march toward absolute justice. 90%, 95%, 100%, transfer complete. With those 2 words, the heavy wheels of the federal justice system began to turn. It is a slow machine bogged down by rigid protocols and stringent evidentiary reviews, but once it locks onto a target, it never stops grinding until that target is completely pulverized. Now came the hardest part of the entire operation: the waiting. I had to live in the same house as the man who sold his daughter's safety to finance his sister's vanity. I had to sleep in the same bed as the man who forged my signature and threatened to strip my custody rights away to protect an abuser. I had to look at his face every single morning and smile, playing the role of the docile, defeated woman who had finally learned her place in the strict family hierarchy. Every single day was an agonizing masterclass in psychological endurance. David would come home from his financial firm, loosen his expensive silk tie, and ask me what I made for dinner. I would serve him perfectly roasted chicken and listen to him complain about his wealthy clients. I would watch him chew his food knowing he had stolen $150,000 from our child. I would pour him a glass of wine, suppressing the overwhelming visceral urge to smash the heavy glass bottle over his head. He grew incredibly bold in his perceived victory. He truly believed he had successfully terrorized me into permanent submission. He started making offhand, arrogant comments about Caroline's resilience, praising his sister for bouncing back so quickly after my golf club rampage. He marveled at her entrepreneurial spirit. I even had the audacity to suggest that Lily should eventually apologize to Caroline for causing such a dramatic misunderstanding and ruining a perfectly good afternoon. I smiled. I nodded obediently. I dug my fingernails so deeply into the palms of my hands that they drew crescent-shaped drops of blood, but my voice remained perfectly steady. I told him I would speak to Lily about it when she was feeling better. I let him bathe in his own monumental arrogance. Behind closed doors, my focus remained entirely on my daughter's physical and emotional recovery. Her burns were slowly beginning to heal, transitioning from angry weeping wounds to taut pink scars. We visited the pediatric burn specialist twice a week. The doctor was pleased with her physical progress, but the psychological scars were much harder to treat. Lily was terrified of leaving the house. She refused to look in the mirror. She asked me constantly if Aunt Caroline was going to come back and hurt her again. I would sit on the edge of her bed, holding her uninjured hand, and promise her that Caroline would never touch her again. I promised her that the bad people were going to face a reckoning they could not even begin to imagine. I could not tell Lily about the FBI or the FDA. I could not burden a 12-year-old child with the heavy weight of an active federal investigation. I just asked her to trust me, and she did. 2 grueling weeks passed. The tension in the house was a living, breathing entity that wrapped tightly around my throat every time David entered a room. The federal agents were working silently in the background, building their subpoenas, verifying the financial ledgers I had provided, and securing the necessary federal warrants. White-collar cases take time to execute because the traps must be perfectly laid. I checked in with my contact daily through a secure burner phone I purchased with cash. He assured me the wheels were in motion. The task force was simply waiting for the perfect, most impactful moment to drop the hammer. That perfect moment arrived in the mail on a crisp Tuesday afternoon. I walked to the mailbox at the end of the driveway and pulled out a stack of envelopes. Hidden between the utility bills and the junk mail was a thick, oversized envelope made of heavy, expensive cardstock. The return address was embossed in shimmering gold foil. It bore the newly rebranded logo of Caroline's business. She had dropped the subtle basement clinic act. The new logo was bold, unapologetically arrogant, and dripping with stolen money. I broke the gold wax seal and slid the heavy invitation out. The card was magnificent, clearly designed to impress the wealthiest socialites in the city. It announced the highly anticipated grand opening gala for Caroline's newly restocked Premier Med Spa facility. She was not just reopening her illegal practice, she was actively expanding it. The invitation boasted about state-of-the-art laser technology and exclusive high-end chemical treatments. She had used David's stolen money to replace everything I had smashed, and she was hosting a massive high-society event to attract wealthy investors and launch a lucrative franchise. The gala was scheduled for that upcoming Saturday night in the grand ballroom of the city's most exclusive luxury hotel. The dress code was strictly black tie. The guest list undoubtedly included local politicians, elite business owners, and every affluent member of Richard and Patricia's country club. Caroline was throwing herself a coronation. She wanted the entire city to witness her rise to the top of the social ladder. I stared at the gold lettering, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across my face. Caroline was gathering every single person her family wanted to impress into one single room. She was setting the stage for her ultimate triumph. She had no idea she had just built the perfect arena for her own public execution. My phone buzzed on the polished mahogany of my desk, shattering the heavy silence of my home office. I glanced down at the illuminated screen. A new text message had just arrived from Caroline. I unlocked the device and read the words, my jaw locking so tightly that a sharp pain shot up into my temples. The message read, "I hope you got the beautiful invitation I mailed Rebecca. I would absolutely love for you to attend the gala." No hard feelings about the little accident in my basement. In fact, if you bring Lily to the grand opening, I can offer her a complimentary premium scar removal treatment on the house. I just got my brand new upgraded laser machines delivered today. See you Saturday. The absolute staggering audacity of the message was breathtaking. She was not just mocking me, she was actively sadistically gloating. She was using the horrific physical trauma she had inflicted on a 12-year-old child as a punchline in a casual text message. She felt entirely untouchable. The vast wealth and pervasive influence of her parents, combined with the stolen money from my husband, had reinforced her deep-seated delusion of absolute invincibility. I stared at the digital message, reading the cruel words a second time. A normal, emotionally driven person would have thrown the smartphone across the room in a fit of despair. A normal mother might have driven back over to that sprawling suburban mansion and finished what the Iron Golf Club had started. But I am not a normal person. I am a forensic accountant. I know that every single arrogant move a criminal makes is just another crucial piece of evidence for the federal prosecution. I took a high-resolution screenshot of the text message, immediately backing it up to my encrypted cloud server. I sent a direct copy to my federal contact in Washington, utilizing the secure drop link we had established. I typed a brief clinical note alongside the image file. Please add extreme psychological harassment and blatant witness intimidation to the primary case file. Caroline was digging her own grave deeper with every keystroke, and I was simply documenting the depth of the hole. Later that evening, Davitt walked into the kitchen carrying the thick gold foil envelope containing the gala invitation. I was standing by the stove, slowly stirring a pot of soup, playing the carefully curated role of the dutiful, subdued wife he expected to see. He tossed the heavy cardstock envelope onto the granite countertop with a loud, dismissive smack. "We are going to this event," David announced, his voice entirely devoid of any warmth or basic respect. He did not ask for my opinion. He issued a command. I kept my eyes fixed on the stove, stirring the soup with methodical, slow circles. "I do not think that is a good idea, David," I said, pitching my voice to sound appropriately anxious and hesitant. "I need to stay home and take care of Lily. She is still recovering from her injuries, and she needs her mother. Besides, I highly doubt Caroline actually wants me present at her celebration." David let out a harsh, mocking scoff. He leaned heavily against the kitchen counter and crossed his arms over his chest, looking at me with pure disdain. "Caroline is being the bigger person here, Rebecca. She is willing to extend a generous olive branch after you acted like an absolute lunatic and destroyed hundreds of thousands of dollars of her property. You are going to this grand opening gala because we need to show a united, perfect family front. My parents have invited their most important private investors and the entire executive board of the country club. If my wife does not show up to support my sister, people will start asking uncomfortable questions. They will wonder if you are still acting hysterical." I used that specific word deliberately. Hysterical. It is the universal cowardly label weak men use to invalidate a woman's entirely justified anger. He wanted to parade me around that luxurious hotel ballroom like a conquered, domesticated animal. He wanted to show his wealthy parents and his narcissistic sister that he had successfully broken my spirit and forced me into total compliance. He needed me there as a living, breathing testament to his absolute control over our household. "It is just one night," Davitt continued, his tone hardening into a thinly veiled, vicious threat. "You will put on a nice, expensive dress. You will smile for the cameras. You will act like a supportive, loving sister-in-law. You need to prove to my family that you are mentally stable, Rebecca. Because if you refuse to go, if you hide in this house and keep acting crazy, I will have no choice but to reconsider the emergency custody discussion we had in the hospital hallway." There it was, the ultimate unforgivable threat weaponized yet again to ensure my total obedience. He was using his own injured daughter as a bargaining chip to protect his sister's fraudulent public image. He was willing to destroy my relationship with my child just to maintain the illusion of his family's perfection. I turned off the stove burner. I wiped my hands slowly on a kitchen towel, keeping my head slightly bowed. I let a few seconds of heavy, suffocating silence stretch between us, allowing him to bask fully in the toxic illusion of his absolute dominance. Then I slowly looked up at him. I let a perfectly measured, terrifyingly calm smile spread across my face. "You are absolutely right, David," I said, my voice smooth, compliant, and utterly devoid of fear. "I have been overly emotional lately. I should definitely be there to support Caroline on her big night. It is highly important that everyone in attendance sees exactly what kind of family we really are." He smiled back at me, completely oblivious to the lethal double meaning hidden in my words. He looked immensely satisfied, puffing out his chest with pride. He was completely blind to the fact that he had just handed me the final necessary piece of my strategic puzzle. I needed unrestricted access to that gala. I needed to be inside that hotel ballroom to execute the final, devastating stage of my plan. By forcing me to attend under the threat of losing my child, he was personally escorting the Trojan horse directly through the city gates. The next 3 days were a masterful exercise in psychological warfare and operational preparation. I went to an upscale boutique and bought a stunning new evening gown. I scheduled a professional blowout at a high-end salon. I behaved exactly like a woman who had finally accepted her subordinate place in the affluent conservative hierarchy of her in-laws. I listened quietly as David bragged on the phone to his father about how he had firmly brought his difficult wife to heel. I packed my daughter's school lunches, carefully helped her change her sterile burn dressings, and kissed her forehead every single night, whispering that the bad people were about to go away forever. Behind the scenes, my secure burner phone was lighting up with encrypted messages. My federal contact in Washington confirmed that the arrest warrants had been officially signed by a federal judge. The Food and Drug Administration and the Federal Bureau of Investigation had coordinated a massive joint tactical task force. They possessed the hotel building blueprints. They possessed the comprehensive guest list. They possessed the exact minute-by-minute schedule of events for the grand opening gala. The tactical team was fully briefed on the layout of the ballroom, and the operation was given the official green light. The timing of the raid was going to be absolutely flawless. On Saturday evening, the night of the gala, I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my master bedroom. I wore a floor-length dark emerald silk gown that clung perfectly to my frame, radiating quiet, expensive elegance. My hair was styled in sleek, cascading waves. My makeup was sharp, highlighting the cold determination in my eyes. I did not look like a defeated, hysterical housewife desperate for her family's approval. I looked like a woman preparing to oversee a hostile, multi-million-dollar corporate takeover. I looked like an apex predator stepping into the hunting grounds. I walked over to my secure desk and unlocked the heavy bottom drawer. I reached inside and pulled out a specialized heavy-duty encrypted USB flash drive. This small, unassuming piece of metal and black plastic contained the entire unredacted truth. It held the digitally forged mortgage documents bearing my stolen signature. It held the comprehensive bank transfers proving David systematically stole Lily's college fund. It held the international shipping manifests for the black market industrial-grade acid. And most importantly, it held the crystal-clear, damning audio recording of David and Caroline actively conspiring to frame an innocent, undocumented immigrant worker for their crimes. This drive was the ultimate irrefutable receipt. It was the digital weapon of mass destruction that would permanently level their entire social, professional, and financial empire in front of everyone they respected. I slipped the encrypted USB drive securely into my small black velvet clutch purse. I snapped the heavy gold clasp shut with a sharp, satisfying click that echoed through the quiet bedroom. The execution was set. I walked downstairs to find David waiting in the foyer. He wore a custom-tailored tuxedo, adjusting his cuffs with an air of complete self-satisfaction. When he looked up and saw me descending the staircase, his arrogant smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. I did not look like a woman who had been intimidated into submission. I looked formidable. He quickly masked his surprise with a condescending nod, telling me it was about time I dressed appropriately for his family standard. I simply smiled, offering no verbal response. I glided past him toward the front door, my posture perfectly straight, carrying the velvet clutch that held his absolute destruction. The drive to the luxury hotel was silent. David spent the entire commute taking business calls, boasting to his associates about his sister's incredible entrepreneurial vision. I stared out the passenger window, watching the city lights blur past, feeling my pulse beat with a steady metronomic calm. We pulled up to the grand entrance of the venue. A red carpet spilled out across the pristine pavement, flanked by velvet ropes and eager photographers from local lifestyle magazines. Valets rushed forward to open our doors. As I stepped out into the flash of camera bulbs, I felt an intoxicating rush of adrenaline. This was not a celebration, this was a crime scene waiting to be processed. We entered the grand ballroom, and the sheer, unadulterated financial excess of the event hit me like a physical wave. Caroline had spared absolutely no expense. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting a warm golden glow over the wealthy attendees. Towering floral arrangements of white orchids and imported roses dominated every table. Waiters in crisp white uniforms circulated smoothly through the crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with crystal flutes of vintage champagne and delicate caviar hors d'oeuvres. I scanned the room with the clinical eye of a forensic accountant. Every ice sculpture, every silk tablecloth, and every bottle of expensive liquor was a direct insult to my daughter. This entire opulent spectacle was financed by a stolen college fund and a fraudulently obtained second mortgage. The sheer audacity of the crime was staggering. Caroline and David were literally drinking champagne paid for by a 12-year-old girl's stolen future. Across the room, I spotted my in-laws holding court. Richard and Patricia were surrounded by a circle of local politicians, elite real estate developers, and high-profile country club members. They were actively parading Caroline around the room, introducing her as a brilliant visionary entrepreneur who was revolutionizing the medical aesthetics industry. Caroline wore a backless, shimmering silver gown that easily cost $10,000. She was soaking up the adoration, laughing loudly, and tossing her hair, playing the role of the humble but brilliant business owner to absolute perfection. David placed a heavy, controlling hand on the small of my back and steered me directly toward his parents. He wanted to display his tamed wife to the family. As we approached the group, Patricia broke off her conversation with a city councilman and turned her sharp, judgmental gaze toward me. Her eyes swept over my emerald gown, searching for a flaw to exploit. "Well, Rebecca," Patricia said, her voice carrying that familiar syrupy tone of passive-aggressive condescension, "I must say you clean up remarkably well. I am so relieved you decided to stop acting so terribly dramatic and finally accepted your proper place in this family. It is vital that we project absolute unity on Caroline's special night." I did not flinch. I did not drop my gaze. I looked directly into Patricia's eyes and offered a smile that was entirely devoid of warmth. "I completely agree, Patricia," I replied, my voice smooth and perfectly modulated. "Unity is crucial when the final accounting takes place. I have recently done a thorough audit of my priorities, and I realized exactly where I need to stand tonight. Everything is about to be brought completely to light." Patricia blinked, her brow furrowing in confusion. She searched my face for any hint of sarcasm or rebellion, but my expression remained impossibly serene. She gave a short, nervous laugh, unsure of how to process the double meaning hidden within my words. Richard stepped forward, clearing his throat loudly to assert his authority. "Just ensure you keep a low profile this evening." "Rebecca," Richard commanded, his tone brusque and dismissive. "Caroline is on the verge of securing major franchise investments tonight. We cannot afford any of your working-class emotional outbursts ruining the sophisticated atmosphere." "I assure you, Richard, my behavior tonight will be nothing short of unforgettable," I answered smoothly. "I guarantee that no one in this room will ever forget this specific grand opening. I promise you a highly sophisticated resolution to all of our recent family issues." Richard scowled, clearly unsettled by my calm demeanor. Before he could issue another insult, Caroline broke through the crowd and threw her arms around David, hugging her brother with exaggerated affection. She pulled back and turned her attention to me, her lips curling into a wicked, triumphant smirk. Rebecca, I am so thrilled you actually showed up, Caroline purred, taking a delicate sip from her champagne flute. I was genuinely worried you might hide at home nursing your grudges. How is little Lily doing? Like I texted you, the offer still stands. Bring her by the new clinic next week. My new laser machines are absolute magic. I can burn those ugly little scars right off her face, free of charge. We are family after all. The overwhelming urge to drive my high heel directly into her knee required monumental restraint to suppress. She was standing in a room paid for by my child, offering to fix the very disfigurement she had maliciously caused, and labeling it a charitable family favor. I tilted my head, matching her arrogant smirk with a cold, terrifying smile of my own. That is an incredibly generous offer, Caroline. I said, my voice dripping with dark, lethal sweetness. But you do not need to worry about Lily's skin anymore. I have implemented a permanent removal strategy for all the toxic defective elements in our lives. We are burning everything toxic completely to the ground. By tomorrow morning, I promise you will have a completely different perspective on how justice operates. Caroline let out a condescending little laugh, shaking her head as if I were a confused child, making nonsensical statements. You are always so weirdly intense, Rebecca. Try to relax and enjoy the free champagne. It is probably the most expensive thing you will ever drink. She turned her back to me, dismissing me entirely, and linked her arm through her mother's. The loud melodic chiming of crystal glasses echoed through the grand ballroom. The master of ceremonies, a well-known local radio host hired for the occasion, stepped up to the grand podium at the front of the room. He tapped the microphone, calling for the attention of the distinguished guests. Ladies and gentlemen, the master of ceremonies announced, his voice booming over the state-of-the-art sound system. Please take your seats. We are about to begin our keynote presentation featuring the visionary founder of this magnificent new enterprise, Caroline. The crowd erupted into enthusiastic applause. The wealthy attendees began moving toward the rows of velvet-lined chairs arranged in front of the main stage. David grabbed my elbow, attempting to steer me toward the reserved front row VIP seating designated for the immediate family. I stopped walking. I gently but firmly detached my arm from his grip. I am going to run to the restroom quickly before the speeches begin, I told him, keeping my tone light and conversational. Save my seat, I will be right back. David rolled his eyes, thoroughly annoyed by the minor inconvenience. Just hurry up, he hissed under his breath. Do not embarrass me by walking down the aisle while she is talking. I turned and walked away, melting seamlessly into the shifting crowd. As soon as I was out of his direct line of sight, my casual stroll transformed into a purposeful, highly calculated maneuver. I bypassed the hallway leading to the restrooms entirely. I stayed close to the shadowed perimeter of the grand ballroom, moving silently along the heavily draped walls. My eyes were locked on my true destination. At the very back of the expansive room, elevated on a temporary staging platform, sat the audiovisual control booth. It was a small, darkened enclosure, filled with mixing boards, lighting rigs, and the primary computer terminal, controlling the massive projector screen hanging above the main stage. I reached the stairs of the AV platform just as the ambient lighting in the ballroom began to dim. A dramatic, pulsing instrumental track started playing over the speakers, building the anticipation for Caroline's grand entrance. The single technician operating the booth was highly distracted, intensely focused on adjusting the spotlight sliders to illuminate the center stage. I walked up the short flight of stairs and stepped quietly into the darkened booth. The technician, a young man wearing heavy headphones, jumped slightly as he noticed my presence. "Excuse me, ma'am, you cannot be up here," the technician whispered urgently, pulling one side of his headphones off his ear. "This is a restricted control area." I flashed him my brightest, most authoritative corporate smile. I held up my hand, displaying the heavy diamond wedding band that connected me to the hosting family. "I am Caroline's sister-in-law," I whispered back, projecting an air of absolute stressed authority. "There has been a critical last-minute change to the presentation schedule. Caroline sent me up here. We have a surprise dedication video from her private investors that needs to play exactly before her promotional reel." The technician frowned, looking stressed and confused by the sudden deviation from his tightly planned script. "Nobody told me about a surprise video." I cannot just switch the input source without the event director's direct approval. I leaned in closer, dropping my voice to a sharp, commanding whisper. The event director works for my father-in-law, and Richard will have you fired and blacklisted from every venue in this city if you ruin Caroline's big surprise. Do you really want to walk down there right now and interrupt the wealthy host to verify a video file, or do you want to plug this drive in and keep your job? I opened my black velvet clutch and pulled out the heavy encrypted USB flash drive. I held it out to him, my gaze completely unyielding. The technician looked from my expensive emerald gown to the heavy diamond ring, and then down at the flashing USB drive. He was a low-level contractor making an hourly wage. He did not get paid enough to argue with demanding rich socialites. He let out a defeated sigh and snatched the drive from my hand. Fine, he muttered, plugging the device directly into the primary presentation laptop. But if this messes up the audio cues, it is entirely on you. It is going to be a flawless execution, I promise softly. Down at the front of the room, the crowd erupted into thunderous applause as Caroline stepped gracefully up to the microphone. The spotlight hit her silver gown, making her look like a radiant, untouchable goddess of wealth and beauty. She smiled brightly, waving to her adoring audience, ready to deliver her lies to the world. I stood in the shadows of the control booth, watching her through the glass panel. I crossed my arms over my chest and waited for the show to truly begin. Caroline tapped the microphone. Her voice echoed through the massive ballroom, dripping with false humility and practiced charm. Thank you all for being here tonight, she began, flashing her pristine, surgically enhanced smile. When I first envisioned this enterprise, I did not just want to build a business. I wanted to build a sanctuary. A place dedicated to health, beauty, and the ultimate empowerment of women. The elite crowd murmured in collective admiration. I stood in the darkened audiovisual booth, staring through the glass at the absolute spectacle of her hypocrisy. It was a masterclass in narcissistic delusion. She spoke passionately about safe, innovative dermatological care, completely ignoring the fact that she had permanently scarred her own 12-year-old niece with smuggled industrial solvents. We live in a world that demands perfection. Caroline continued, pacing slowly across the stage, so the spotlight could catch the shimmer of her silver gown. But true beauty comes from within. It comes from trust. It comes from knowing that the professionals caring for your skin have the highest standards of medical excellence. Down in the front row, Richard and Patricia were practically vibrating with pride. Patricia dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, playing the role of the overwhelmed, supportive mother. Next to them sat Davitt. He was leaning back in his velvet chair, holding a glass of vintage champagne, looking like a man who had successfully conquered the world. He believed he had stolen my daughter's future, silenced my justified rage, and secured his family's criminal empire without a single consequence. The technician next to me in the booth checked his digital timeline. He reached for the main transition slider on the soundboard. She is wrapping up the introduction, he whispered to me, keeping his eyes on the monitors. The promotional video is queued up next. I placed my hand firmly over his on the control board. I will take it from here, I said softly, my voice leaving no room for argument or hesitation. He stepped back, raising his hands in surrender, completely intimidated by the sheer intensity radiating from my posture. I stepped up to the primary console. My fingers hovered over the keyboard connected to the main projector system. The USB drive I had plugged in was already fully synced. I had arranged the presentation slides with the exact same meticulous precision I used when presenting evidence to a federal grand jury. And now, Caroline announced, gesturing dramatically toward the massive blank screen suspended above the stage. I invite you all to watch a short presentation detailing the journey, the technology, and the uncompromising integrity behind our brand new facility. The ballroom lights dimmed perfectly on cue. The crowd fell into an expectant, hushed silence. Caroline turned her body toward the screen, maintaining her flawless, camera-ready smile. I pressed the enter key. The massive projector screen did not display a beautifully edited montage of glowing skin and soothing spa music. Instead, the screen flickered blindingly bright white for a fraction of a second before displaying a stark, high-resolution image of a heavily redacted bank ledger. A murmur of confusion rippled through the hundreds of wealthy guests. Caroline's smile faltered slightly. She tapped the side of her microphone, looking up at the screen with an annoyed furrow in her brow. It seems we are having a slight technical difficulty. She laughed nervously, trying to maintain her polished composure. Just bear with us for a moment. It was no technical difficulty. I hit the next key, triggering a bold red graphic overlay that highlighted specific lines on the bank ledger. The text on the screen was massive, easily readable from the very back row of the ballroom. It read, "Funding the fraud. $150,000 stolen from a miners' college fund." The confusion in the room instantly morphed into shocked, uncomfortable whispers. I watched David in the front. The transformation was instantaneous and absolute. He bolted upright in his chair, his champagne flute slipping from his fingers and shattering against the marble floor. The liquid soaked into his expensive leather shoes, but he did not even look down. All the blood drained from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost. He recognized his own personal bank accounts. He recognized the exact routing numbers and the massive, heavily penalized withdrawal. Before anyone could fully process the stolen college fund, I transitioned to the next slide. The screen wiped cleanly, replacing the bank ledgers with a side-by-side comparison of two highly detailed legal documents. On the left was the official second mortgage contract for my family home, complete with the lending institution's logo and the required spousal signatures. On the right was an enlarged forensic breakdown of my signature on that exact document. Bright yellow digital markers pointed out the pixelation artifacts and the mismatched digital rendering layers. Below the images, giant text blared across the room: felony wire fraud and identity theft. Financing obtained through forged spousal signatures. The murmurs in the crowd escalated into loud, alarmed gasps. These were affluent people. They were real estate developers, corporate lawyers, and bank executives. They knew exactly what they were looking at. They recognized the severe federal implications of forged loan documents. Several investors sitting near Richard and Patricia physically leaned away from them, creating a visible ring of isolation around my in-laws. Patricia clutched Richard's arm, her jaw dropping open in sheer horror. "Richard, what is happening?" she demanded loudly, her voice shrill with panic. "Turn it off! Tell them to turn the machine off!" Caroline was frozen on the stage. She stared up at the massive screen, her silver gown suddenly looking ridiculous against the backdrop of blatant federal crimes. She waved her hands frantically at the audiovisual booth, mouthing the words to cut the feed, completely abandoning her professional demeanor. I did not cut the feed. I hit the spacebar one more time, delivering the final, fatal blow to her entire existence. The screen shifted again. This time it displayed a collage of international shipping manifests and customs declarations. I had highlighted the country of origin in bright glowing neon green. Next to the shipping documents were the detailed purchase orders bearing Caroline's name and her business address. The text overlaid on the screen was brutal, clinical, and impossible to misunderstand. It read, "Importation of restricted, unregulated chemical solvents. Black market industrial grade, trichloroacetic acid. Purchased without a valid medical license." And then right beside the purchase orders, I displayed her supposed medical credentials. I had pulled her business registration and cross-referenced it with the state medical board. A massive red stamp graphic appeared diagonally across her framed certificates. Fake, unlicensed, illegal. The ballroom erupted into absolute chaos. The polite high society gathering dissolved into a frenzy of shouting and outrage. Women in expensive gowns covered their mouths in shock. Men in tuxedos pointed at the screen, pulling out their smartphones to record the disastrous spectacle. This was the ultimate scandal, playing out live in front of the city's most powerful gossips and media representatives. "Turn it off!" Caroline shrieked into the live microphone, the sound feeding back with a high-pitched, deafening squeal that made half the room cover their ears. She dropped the microphone onto the stage floor and ran toward the edge of the platform, her face contorted in an ugly mask of pure, unfiltered panic. "This is a lie. Someone hacked the system. Turn off the projector right now." Down in the front row, David was spinning around wildly, searching the darkened perimeter of the ballroom. He was looking for me. He finally realized that the docile, obedient wife he left standing in the kitchen was a complete fabrication. He realized that the woman he married, the forensic accountant he had so foolishly underestimated, had just meticulously detonated a financial bomb directly under his entire life. I reached over to the secondary control rack in the AV booth. Sitting perfectly aligned next to the soundboard was a spare wireless microphone. I picked it up, feeling the cool, heavy metal against my palm. I flicked the power switch on. A tiny green light illuminated on the handle, indicating it was live and connected directly to the master speaker system of the grand ballroom. I left the technician cowering in the corner of the booth. I pushed open the glass door and stepped out onto the metal landing overlooking the chaotic sea of wealthy guests. The ambient light caught the dark, shimmering emerald silk of my gown. I stood at the top of the stairs looking down at the absolute destruction I had just orchestrated. Caroline was still screaming at the stagehands. Patricia was hyperventilating into her lace handkerchief. Richard was shouting at the hotel management. David was staring up at the booth, his eyes locking onto my figure in the shadows. He looked like a man staring at his own executioner. I raised the microphone to my lips. My voice cut through the shouting and the panic with the precision of a scalpel. It boomed from every speaker in the vaulted ceiling, echoing with a terrifying absolute authority that brought the entire ballroom to an instantaneous dead silence. Let's talk about dedication to health, Caroline. I said my words cold, clear, and dripping with lethal promise. Let's listen to your own words. I lowered the microphone from my lips and reached over the massive mixing console. My finger found the spacebar on the presentation laptop. I pressed it down with absolute, unwavering certainty. The grand ballroom's state-of-the-art surround sound system, which Caroline had rented for thousands of stolen dollars, clicked with a sharp electronic hum. For a fraction of a second, the cavernous space was filled with dead, heavy static. Then the undeniable crystal-clear recording of my husband's voice echoed from every speaker in the vaulted ceiling. If the police show up with a warrant, we need a scapegoat. We need someone who has direct access to the basement, someone who handles cleaning supplies, and someone nobody will believe. The audio quality was immaculate. The micro recorder I had sewn into David's briefcase captured every inflection, every arrogant nuance of his tone. Down on the main floor, the wealthy attendees froze completely. The polite clinking of crystal champagne flutes ceased entirely. Hundreds of heads swiveled frantically trying to locate the source of the hidden broadcast. Then, Caroline's recorded voice answered her brother, sounding anxious but deeply calculating. Rosa. A collective sharp intake of breath swept through the audience. Several of the elite guests knew exactly who Rosa was. She was the quiet, hard-working, undocumented immigrant woman who cleaned the sprawling suburban mansions of this very neighborhood. She was a fixture in their homes, a woman they trusted. Exactly. David's recorded voice confirmed, booming over the heads of the horrified investors. Rosa cleans the spa room. She is undocumented. If the detectives start asking questions about the chemicals, you tell them Rosa brought those bottles from her home country. You say she claimed they were heavy-duty cleaning solvents. You tell the police she must have accidentally mixed them up with the spa products. I watched the faces of the city's most powerful politicians and socialites contort in absolute disgust. This was not just a scandal about forged documents or hidden debt. This was a raw, unfiltered broadcast of profound human depravity. Patricia's recorded voice chimed in next, sounding relieved and sickeningly upbeat. That is brilliant, David. Who are the police going to believe, a prominent, wealthy homeowner or an illegal immigrant who barely speaks English? Down in the front row, Patricia physically recoiled as her own voice betrayed her to her country club peers. She raised her hands to her face, her eyes wide with unadulterated terror. The wealthy real estate developers and local politicians standing near her immediately took a synchronized, deliberate step backward. It was a physical manifestation of social exile. In a matter of seconds, Patricia had transformed from a respected matriarch into a highly toxic pariah. She reached out to grab Richard's arm for support, but her husband violently yanked his sleeve away from her grasp. Richard was staring at the speakers, his face a mask of complete and utter devastation. His empire of influence was burning to the ground and his own family had lit the match. But the recording was not finished. It was about to deliver the final devastating blow to Caroline's carefully constructed image of a caring health and beauty professional. But what if Rosa denies it? The recorded Caroline asked, her voice tinged with nervous hesitation. David let out a dark, cynical chuckle on the tape. The sound reverberated through the grand ballroom, exposing the pure malice residing in my husband's soul. She will not deny it. If the police interrogate her, I will personally pull her aside. I will tell her that if she does not take the fall for a simple negligence charge, I will use my contacts to call Immigration and Customs Enforcement. I will have her deported, and she will never see her children in this country again. She will take the blame, Caroline. She has no money and no power. She is the perfect target. The reaction from the crowd was visceral. A woman in a diamond necklace covered her mouth, letting out a loud, audible gasp of horror. An influential city councilman who had been drinking champagne with Richard just minutes prior slammed his glass down on a nearby cocktail table with tremendous force, shaking his head in absolute revulsion. The investors, the people Caroline desperately needed to fund her nationwide franchise, were looking at her as if she were covered in a highly contagious disease. Then came the most damning part of the audio, the part that cemented their absolute ruin. On the recording, the tense atmosphere between the siblings broke into celebratory relief. The unmistakable sound of crystal glasses clinking in a toast echoed through the speakers. Then Caroline laughed. It was a cruel, high-pitched, vindictive sound. I cannot believe Rebecca actually took Lily to the hospital over a little skin peel, the recorded Caroline sneered. The girl's face was already a disaster. I was doing her a favor. Now she just has an excuse to wear a paper bag over her head. The ballroom erupted. It was no longer just shocked whispers. It was a roar of active, furious condemnation. Guests began shouting in outrage. This elite crowd might tolerate tax evasion or corporate loopholes, but openly mocking a severely burned 12-year-old child and plotting to deport an innocent mother crossed a line of basic human decency that no amount of money could ever erase. Caroline collapsed onto her knees on the main stage. Her silver gown pooled around her on the floor like a deflated parachute. She pressed her hands over her ears, sobbing hysterically, desperately trying to block out the sound of her own voice sealing her fate. She tore at her perfectly styled hair, ruining her flawless image in a matter of seconds. She crawled toward the edge of the stage, begging the sound technician to kill the power. But the contractor had already fled the control booth, leaving me in absolute command of the hardware. Richard the proud, imposing patriarch who had built his entire identity on suburban prestige, stood frozen in the center of the room. His face was a dark, dangerous shade of purple. He turned slowly and looked at David. He did not look at his son with protective parental instinct. He looked at him with sheer unbridled hatred. David had not just ruined his own life. He had dragged the entire family name through the mud, exposing them as bigoted, sociopathic criminals in front of every important person they knew. David was standing perfectly still in the front row. The champagne from his shattered glass was still soaking into his leather shoes. His chest heaved with rapid, shallow breaths. He looked up at the massive projector screen, which was still displaying the damning federal evidence of his wire fraud and stolen college funds. Then, he slowly turned his head and looked up at the elevated audiovisual platform where I stood. From my vantage point on the metal landing, I looked down at him. I did not break eye contact. I did not flinch. I let him see the absolute, uncompromising lack of mercy in my posture. I had promised to balance the ledger, and the account was finally settled. The realization of his total, irreversible destruction snapped the last remaining thread of David's sanity. His financial career was entirely dead. His freedom was about to be stripped away by federal prosecutors. His social standing was reduced to absolute ash. He had nothing left to lose, and that realization triggered a violent primal surge of adrenaline. David let out a feral, guttural roar that tore through his throat. His hands balled into tight, white-knuckled fists. The panic in his eyes vanished, replaced instantly by a blind, murderous rage. He charged. He lunged forward, shoving a wealthy female investor violently out of his way. The woman stumbled and fell into a catering table, sending silver platters crashing to the floor, but David did not even glance back. He sprinted through the dense crowd of panicked guests, treating the elite attendees like bowling pins. He knocked over a massive tiered champagne tower. Hundreds of crystal glasses shattered across the marble floor in an explosive crash. David slipped on the spilled alcohol, his knee slamming hard into the ground, but he scrambled back to his feet like a wild animal. His tailored tuxedo jacket ripped at the shoulder as he vaulted over a fallen velvet rope. "Rebecca!" he screamed at the top of his lungs, his voice cracking with unhinged fury. "You psychotic liar, I am going to kill you! You set us up, it is all a lie!" The crowd parted before him in absolute terror. No one dared to step into the path of a man who had completely lost his mind. He reached the back of the ballroom in seconds, his face flushed and sweating, his eyes locked onto me with the terrifying intensity of a cornered predator. I stood at the top of the metal staircase leading to the control booth. I did not step back. I did not reach for a weapon. I simply watched him charge up the steps, his face twisted into an ugly, violent mask. He was screaming that I was insane, that I had fabricated the evidence, that he was going to destroy me with his bare hands. I watched his expensive leather shoes pound against the metal grates of the stairs. I saw the spittle flying from his lips as he screamed my name. This was the man who had promised to protect me. This was the man who had stood in a hospital hallway and threatened to take my burned daughter away from me. He was revealing his true violent nature to a room full of hundreds of witnesses, adding a highly public attempted assault to his rapidly growing list of federal charges. The wealthy attendees were screaming for hotel security. Flashbulbs from the local media photographers were erupting in a chaotic, blinding strobe light effect, capturing every single moment of his violent, unhinged charge. He was ensuring that his face twisted in rage would be on the front page of every local newspaper by tomorrow morning. "You are dead," David roared, his heavy footsteps shaking the metal platform. "You ruined my family." I gripped the metal railing of the booth. I felt the cold, hard steel against my palms, grounding me in the reality of my triumph. He thought he could silence me with brute force, just as he had tried to silence me with his family's wealth. But brute force is the weapon of a man who has already lost the war. He reached the final step. His fist swung upward, aimed directly at my face. Driven by the absolute desperation of a man who knew his entire life was over, his fist was inches from my face, propelled by the raw, desperate momentum of a man whose entire universe had just collapsed. I did not close my eyes. I did not raise my hands to protect myself. I simply stared directly into his dilated, bloodshot eyes, waiting for the impact. But the impact never came. Before his knuckles could connect with my jaw, a sound completely unlike anything else in that luxurious acoustic-controlled ballroom shattered the air. It was a massive concussive boom of heavy wood and reinforced steel being violently breached. The towering, ornate double doors at the main entrance of the hotel ballroom did not just open. They were physically kicked inward with such extreme tactical force that one of the heavy brass hinges snapped, sending a piece of the doorframe clattering against the marble floor. "Federal agents, nobody move, stay exactly where you are." The booming, authoritative command ripped through the chaos, amplified by a heavy megaphone. The sheer, overwhelming volume of the breach froze the entire room in a state of absolute, terrified suspension. The heavy mahogany doors had been splintered with a customized battering ram, ensuring maximum shock and awe. The sound resonated in my chest, a physical manifestation of the justice I had meticulously orchestrated. Even David froze. His fists stopped suspended in midair, just a breath away from my cheek. His eyes darted away from me, snapping toward the back of the room where the deafening commotion had originated. A veritable flood of law enforcement personnel poured into the opulent space. This was not a squad of local beat cops showing up to handle a noise complaint. This was a highly coordinated multi-agency federal raid. Dozens of agents swarmed through the shattered entrance, fanning out with practiced military precision to secure every single exit. Half of them wore heavy, dark tactical vests bearing the bold yellow letters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The other half wore windbreakers identifying them as federal inspectors from the Food and Drug Administration's Office of Criminal Investigations. The visual contrast was jarring and spectacular. Heavily armed federal operatives, wielding tactical flashlights and radios, were cutting through a sea of terrified socialites draped in silk gowns and custom tuxedos. The wealthy elite of the city people who believed their bank accounts made them entirely immune to the harsh realities of the justice system were now screaming and dropping to their knees on the polished marble floor. Waiters dropped trays of expensive appetizers as they scrambled backward to comply with the shouted orders. Hands where we can see them! Step away from the exits! The lead tactical commander barked, shining a high-lumen flashlight across the stunned crowd. David let out a panicked, breathless gasp. His arm fell limply to his side. The murderous rage that had consumed him just seconds prior evaporated completely instantly, replaced by the pathetic, shivering reality of a white-collar criminal realizing he was finally caught. He looked down at the swarm of federal agents securing the ballroom floor, and then he looked back at me. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He was completely paralyzed by the catastrophic magnitude of what was happening. His chest heaved as the truth of my absolute betrayal fully registered in his mind. Target acquired on the audiovisual platform. A voice shouted from the base of the stairs. Subject is aggressive. Move, move, move. Before David could even attempt to run, two heavily built federal agents charged up the metal staircase of the control booth. They moved with terrifying speed and efficiency. David raised his hands in a weak, frantic gesture of surrender, stammering that it was a massive misunderstanding, but the agents did not hesitate. The lead agent grabbed David by the collar of his ruined, custom-tailored tuxedo jacket and spun him around with brutal force. David slammed chest first against the heavy metal railing of the platform. The air rushed out of his lungs in a loud, painful wheeze. The second agent swept David's legs out from under him, sending my husband crashing face first onto the industrial metal grating of the floor. The impact echoed loudly, a physical manifestation of his sudden violent descent from privilege. He let out a sharp, pathetic cry as the wind was knocked out of him completely, incapacitated by men who were trained to handle actual hardened criminals. David, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, interstate money laundering, and federal extortion. The agent announced, his voice cold and loud enough to be heard over the panicked murmurs of the crowd below. He yanked David's arms behind his back, securing his wrists with a heavy pair of steel handcuffs. The ratcheting sound of the metal teeth locking into place was the most beautiful, satisfying music I had ever heard in my entire life. David writhed on the floor, groaning in pain, his cheek pressed against the dirty metal grate. "Rebecca, please," he sobbed, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. Tell them it is a mistake. You are my wife. You have to help me. We have a daughter. You cannot let them do this to me." I looked down at the man who had stolen my daughter's college fund. I looked at the man who had threatened to strip me of my parental rights to protect a child abuser. I reached over to the small beverage station the audiovisual contractor had set up in the corner of the booth. I picked up a plastic cup filled with sparkling cider, the closest thing to champagne available in the control room. "I am helping you, David," I said calmly, taking a slow, deliberate sip from the cup. "I am helping you face the consequences you so desperately tried to avoid. You wanted me to be a rational adult. This is what complete, unyielding rationality looks like." Down on the main stage, the scene was equally chaotic and satisfying. Caroline was still kneeling on the floor, her silver designer gown pooling around her in a glittering mess. She was hyperventilating, her hands tangled in her perfectly styled hair, ruining her expensive salon blowout as she clawed at her own scalp in sheer panic. 3 federal agents from the Food and Drug Administration, flanked by 2 armed Federal Bureau of Investigation operatives, marched directly up the center aisle and stepped onto the elevated platform. They bypassed the ruined champagne tower and surrounded the terrified, sobbing woman. Caroline scrambled backward, shaking her head violently as the agents approached. "No, no, no," she shrieked, her voice echoing wildly through the massive room. "You cannot do this. I am a legitimate business owner. I am an entrepreneur. My father knows the mayor. You are making a huge mistake. Call my lawyer immediately." "Caroline, you are under federal arrest for the unlicensed practice of medicine, the illegal importation of restricted and misbranded chemical compounds, and felony child endangerment," the lead female agent stated, pulling a pair of handcuffs from her utility belt. She did not raise her voice, but the absolute authority in her tone commanded the attention of the entire room. "I did not do it!" Caroline wailed, struggling wildly, as two agents grabbed her arms and hauled her forcefully to her feet. It was the cleaning lady. It was the immigrant. She brought those chemicals into my house. I am innocent. She is lying. We have the audio recordings of your conspiracy to commit federal extortion and frame an innocent civilian, the agent replied, completely unbothered by her hysterical flailing. The agent snapped the cold steel cuffs securely around Caroline's wrists, pinning her arms behind her back. You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you start using it immediately. Caroline's knees buckled. She went entirely limp, forcing the federal agents to physically hold her upright by her underarms. The arrogant, untouchable queen of the suburban elite had been reduced to a weeping, hyperventilating criminal, being frog marched off her own stage in front of every single investor she had tried to impress. As the agents dragged her down the center aisle, her silver gown dragged heavily across the floor, collecting the spilled champagne and broken glass. It was a perfectly fitting walk of shame. The elite attendees of the grand opening gala stood frozen in a wide perimeter around the room, watching the spectacle with wide, terrified eyes. These were people who thrived on gossip, and I had just handed them the greatest scandal this city had ever seen. The whispers were already spreading like wildfire. They were looking at the massive projector screen, which still displayed the shipping manifests for the black market acid, and then looking at Caroline being hauled away in handcuffs. The family's pristine reputation was shattering into a million unrecoverable pieces in real time. Off to the side of the stage, Patricia was having a complete psychological breakdown. The matriarch of the family, the woman who had spent decades looking down her nose at my working-class background, was pulling frantically at the collar of her expensive lace dress, gasping for air. Her carefully constructed universe of wealth, privilege, and social immunity had just been violently dismantled by the federal justice system. She was watching her golden children transform into federal inmates right before her eyes. Richard stood beside her, his face completely devoid of color. He was a man who solved problems with his checkbook and his country club connections. I was currently staring at a problem that no amount of money could fix. Federal indictments do not care about your bank account balance or your golf handicap. His son was being hauled down the stairs of the audiovisual booth in handcuffs. His daughter was being dragged through the lobby by armed agents. His empire of influence was completely irreparably dead. Who did this? Patricia suddenly screamed, her voice cracking with a raw, guttural panic. She spun around wildly, glaring at the terrified guests, the hotel staff and the remaining federal agents securing the scene. Who called them? Who ruined my family? We are good people. We donate to charity. Who did this to my children? I stood at the top of the platform. The federal agent hauling David away paused, looking back at me to ensure I was safe. I gave the agent a polite, respectful nod. He tipped his head in return and continued dragging my sobbing husband down the metal stairs, guiding him toward the waiting transport vehicles outside. Then I turned my attention back to the mixing console. The spare wireless microphone was still resting on the counter, perfectly synced to the ballroom's massive surround sound system. The green power indicator light was still glowing brightly. I picked it up, feeling the cool metal against my palm. I stepped to the edge of the metal landing, making sure I was perfectly visible to Patricia, Richard, and the entire captive audience below. I wanted them to see exactly who had burned their fraudulent empire to the ground. I raised the microphone to my lips. My voice, amplified by the heavy speakers, cut through Patricia's hysterical sobbing with the precise, icy execution of a seasoned professional settling a final, massive, and deeply personal debt. I told you I was not dropping the charges, I said, looking directly down into Patricia's horrified, tear-streaked face. I just moved them to a higher court. I dropped the microphone. It hit the metal grating of the audiovisual platform with a sharp, resonant thud that echoed across the silent ballroom. I did not wait to watch the federal agents finish processing the crime scene. I turned my back on the devastating wreckage of my in-laws' fraudulent empire and walked down the back stairwell. The cool night air hit my face as I exited through the rear service doors of the luxury hotel. I surrendered my valet ticket, climbed into my car, and drove away from the flashing red and blue lights, illuminating the grand entrance. The silence in the cabin of my vehicle was profound. For the first time in over a decade, I was breathing oxygen that was not tainted by their constant, suffocating judgment. The aftermath was swift, brutal, and entirely public. By Sunday morning, the story was the lead feature on every local news network and regional newspaper. The media had an absolute field day. They did not just cover the unlicensed medical spa or the smuggled industrial-grade chemicals. Enterprising investigative journalists, fed by the trail of breadcrumbs my federal dossier provided, dug into the financial crimes. They exposed the wire fraud, the money laundering, and the terrifying conspiracy to frame an undocumented worker. The sudden social isolation was absolute and completely unforgiving. They had built their entire identity on the foundation of looking down on people like me. They had demanded absolute perfection and projected an aura of flawless aristocratic superiority. Now they were trapped in an immense mansion hiding behind drawn curtains, fielding calls from defense attorneys who demanded massive retainers they could no longer easily afford. Their golden children were sitting in federal holding cells denied bail due to the sheer severity of the extortion and witness tampering charges. The empire was reduced to a pile of toxic smoldering ashes. I was sitting at the kitchen island, helping Lily review her math homework, when my cell phone vibrated on the granite countertop. The incoming caller identification displayed an unknown out-of-state number. It was the designated routing prefix for the Regional Federal Detention Center, where individuals awaiting their initial grand jury hearings were temporarily housed. I looked at the screen, a cold, calculating calm settling over my features. I told Lily to go upstairs and pick out a movie for us to watch. I waited until I heard her bedroom door click shut before I picked up the device. I did not say hello, I simply waited. An automated robotic voice warned me that the call was originating from a federal correctional facility and was subject to monitoring and recording. I pressed the required key to accept the charges. Rebecca. David's voice crackled through the receiver. It was a pathetic, shattered sound. The arrogant, commanding tone of the wealthy financial manager was completely gone. He sounded terrified, exhausted, and desperately small. I leaned back against the kitchen counter, tracing the rim of my coffee mug with a single finger. Yes, David. I answered, my voice carrying the casual, unbothered tone of someone ordering takeout. How are the accommodations? I assume the thread count on the bedding is slightly lower than what you are accustomed to. He let out a ragged, desperate sob. It was a miserable, grating noise. Rebecca, please, you have to help me. You have to fix this. It is a nightmare in here. I have not slept in days. The food is inedible. They have me in a cell block with actual violent criminals. You proved your point. You won. Now please, you have to get me out of here. I took a slow sip of my coffee, savoring the bitter dark roast. I am afraid federal wire fraud and conspiracy to commit extortion are not simple disagreements we can negotiate over the phone, David. The federal government tends to frown upon wealthy men stealing from children and framing undocumented mothers. I gasped for air, his panic escalating into a frantic, rambling plea. I was just trying to help my family, Rebecca. You know how Caroline is. You know how my parents are. They pressured me. I had to protect my sister's business. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. I never meant for Lily to get burned. It was an accident. I was just trying to keep the family together. You have to believe me. I closed my eyes, absorbing the sheer, unadulterated cowardice of his statement. Even now, facing decades in federal prison, he refused to take an ounce of accountability. He blamed his sister. He blamed his parents. He invoked the sacred banner of family unity to justify stealing from his own daughter. He was a parasite feeding on anyone around him to survive. You did not try to keep our family together, David. I corrected him, my voice dropping to a lethal, razor-sharp register. You tried to keep your family together. Lily and I were never your family. We were just assets you thought you could leverage and abuse. You looked me in the eye in that hospital hallway, knowing your sister had chemically tortured your child, and you threatened to take my daughter away from me to protect your profit margins. Do not insult my intelligence by pretending you are a victim of circumstance. I can fix it, he pleaded, completely ignoring my accusation. He was solely focused on his own immediate survival. Listen to me, Rebecca. The lawyers say the judge might grant bail at the hearing tomorrow, but the bond is going to be massive because of the flight risk and the extortion charges. My parents' assets are tied up in the investigations. They cannot liquidate anything fast enough. You have to sell the house. I raised an eyebrow, genuinely astounded by the limitless boundary of his audacity. David's voice grew faster, more urgent. The housing market is incredibly hot right now. If you list it immediately, we can get a cash buyer. You can use the equity to post bail for me and Caroline. Once we are out, we can hire a better legal team. We can fight this. We can fight the federal prosecutors. I will pay you back every single cent, Rebecca. I promise. Just sell the house and get us out of here. We are family. I was demanding that I render myself and my burned daughter completely homeless to purchase his temporary freedom. He wanted me to sacrifice our only remaining shelter to rescue the woman who scarred my child. I let a long, heavy, suffocating silence stretch across the phone line. I listened to his ragged breathing, letting him hang suspended in the desperate hope that his manipulation was working. I let him believe for just a few seconds that the obedient, compliant wife he thought he had married was going to obediently fall back into line and rescue him from his own disastrous choices. David, I finally said, my voice as cold and hard as a diamond, I cannot sell the house to post your bail. Why not? He shrieked, his panic morphing instantly into aggressive entitlement. You are on the deed. You have the legal authority. You have to do this, Rebecca. You are my wife. I am a forensic accountant, David. I reminded him softly. I know exactly how to secure an asset. The morning after I discovered the fraudulent second mortgage you took out using my forged signature, I contacted a specialized asset recovery firm. They immediately placed a heavy, impenetrable legal lien on the entire property. What are you talking about? He gasped, the confusion evident in his strained voice. I filed a massive civil suit against you for the embezzlement of $150,000 from a minor's protected educational trust. I explained, articulating every single syllable with absolute devastating clarity. The house is already frozen by my lawyers to reimburse Lily's stolen college fund. You cannot sell it. Your parents cannot leverage it. It is locked in a judicial vault until every single penny you stole from your daughter is returned with interest. You have absolutely nothing left to bargain with. No, David whimpered, the realization of his total, inescapable ruin finally crushing him. No, Rebecca, please. You cannot leave me in here. I will not survive. Please. I stood up from the kitchen stool. I looked out the window at the peaceful, quiet street. The sun was shining. The air was clear. The toxic, suffocating weight of the past decade was completely, irreversibly gone. Enjoy your new orange jumpsuit, David, I said, delivering the final icy blow. It really highlights your hypocrisy. I did not wait to hear him scream. I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red button terminating the connection. I opened the settings on my device, selected the Federal Detention Center's routing number, and permanently blocked it. I placed the phone face down on the cool granite countertop. The silence in the kitchen was beautiful, pristine, and entirely mine. The ledger was perfectly balanced, the debts were fully collected, and the final account was closed forever. 6 months passed. Time, much like a meticulous audit, has a way of clarifying exactly what holds true value and what is merely an inflated liability. We did not stay in that sprawling, suffocating suburban house. Once the legal team secured the equity to reimburse the stolen funds, I listed the property, sold it to a corporate buyer who paid entirely in cash and never looked back. We packed our lives into a moving truck and relocated across the country to a vibrant coastal city where the air always smells of salt and fresh beginnings. There are no towering colonial mansions here, designed to make outsiders feel small. There are no country club hierarchies or whispered judgments masquerading as polite conversation. There is only the crisp, unburdened reality of a life built on absolute truth. I purchased a beautiful, light-filled condominium overlooking the harbor. The walls are painted in bright, warm tones, a stark contrast to the sterile, clinical white of Caroline's basement. Every morning I wake up, brew my coffee, and watch the sailboats glide across the water. There is no dread tightening my chest. There are no footsteps to fear. The silence in our new home is no longer the tense, terrifying quiet of a hostage waiting for the next psychological blow. It is the peaceful, resonant silence of complete and total safety. I transferred my position to the regional office of my firm, stepping into a senior directorial role. I spend my days doing what I do best, dismantling corporate fraud, and following the hidden trails of dirty money. But I do it now with a renewed fierce sense of purpose. I know exactly what kind of monsters hide behind falsified ledgers. The most profound transformation, however, has not been geographical or professional. It has been the breathtaking revival of my daughter. When we first arrived in this new city, Lily was still hiding behind high collars and long sleeves, terrified that the world would look at her with the same vicious cruelty her aunt and cousin had weaponized against her. The trauma of that day in the basement had cast a long, dark shadow over her gentle spirit. But healing, much like justice, requires patience, expert care, and an environment completely devoid of toxicity. We found a phenomenal pediatric dermatologist who specializes in severe trauma recovery. Through a carefully managed, legitimate regimen of medical care, the angry, weeping burns on Lily's face and arms have slowly transformed. They are no longer a source of physical agony. They have faded into faint, delicate pink lines, like the subtle brushstrokes of a watercolor painting. The physical healing was a medical triumph, but her emotional resurrection is nothing short of a miracle. I enrolled her in a local arts academy that values creativity and character over superficial perfection. Last Friday afternoon, I stood in the doorway of our sunlit kitchen, leaning against the doorframe, watching a scene that brought tears of pure, unadulterated joy to my eyes. Lily was standing at the kitchen island covered in flour baking chocolate chip cookies. She was not alone. 3 of her new classmates were gathered around her, laughing uproariously at a joke one of them had just told. They were wearing short-sleeved shirts. Lily was wearing a tank top. She was not hiding her arms. She was not shrinking into herself. Her head was thrown back, her eyes crinkling at the corners with genuine radiant happiness. She looked beautiful. Not the manufactured, injected artificial beauty that Caroline worshipped, but the luminous, undeniable beauty of a child who knows she is entirely safe and unconditionally loved. The dark, adult-sized bruises that once marred her wrists are entirely gone, replaced by colorful woven friendship bracelets her new peers made for her. Julie's cruel, mocking text messages are a distant, irrelevant memory. My daughter is thriving, stepping into the brilliant light of her own future, entirely untethered from the generational trauma of her father's bloodline. While our new life is flourishing in the sunlight, the empire I left behind has completely collapsed into ruin. I still receive automated legal updates from the federal prosecutor's office, clinical notifications detailing the final accounting of my former in-law's destruction. Richard and Patricia are drowning in a suffocating ocean of legal debt. The high-powered defense attorneys they hired to protect their golden children required exorbitant non-refundable retainers. With their assets closely monitored by federal investigators and their social standing utterly obliterated by the public audio broadcast at the gala, their network of wealthy investors entirely vanished. Banks called in their commercial loans. Business partners severed ties overnight, invoking morality clauses to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout. Richard was forced to sell his prized estate at a massive loss just to keep up with the mounting legal bills. They are currently living in a cramped, unremarkable apartment on the outskirts of the city they used to rule, completely ostracized from the elite society that once defined their entire existence. The country club formally revoked their memberships. They are social pariahs forced to spend their twilight years looking over their shoulders, drowning in the bitter realization that their own arrogance engineered their absolute downfall. Caroline's fate was far more severe, a direct consequence of her sociopathic vanity. The federal justice system does not offer favorable plea deals to individuals who import restricted industrial chemicals, permanently disfigure children, and actively conspire to frame undocumented immigrants. The evidence I provided was utterly bulletproof. The financial ledgers, the international shipping manifests, and the audio recording created a prosecution case, so hermetically sealed that her expensive defense team advised her to plead guilty to avoid a drawn-out, highly publicized trial that would only yield a harsher maximum sentence. The federal judge, entirely unmoved by her performative, tearful apologies during the sentencing hearing, handed down a definitive, unyielding mandate. Caroline is currently serving a 5-year sentence in a federal correctional institution. There are no cashmere lounge sets in federal prison. There are no vintage champagnes or elite social gatherings. She is stripped of her designer gowns, her smuggled laser machines, and her superficial authority. She has 5 long years to stare at the concrete walls of her tiny cell and contemplate the terrifying reality that she picked a fight with a mother who knew exactly how to dismantle a life. As for David, his ruin is absolute, comprehensive, and entirely self-inflicted. The divorce was finalized, rapidly expedited by the sheer volume of his felony charges. He did not contest a single demand. He surrendered full sole legal and physical custody of Lily to me, permanently relinquishing his parental rights in a desperate, futile attempt to garner leniency from the sentencing judge. It did not work. His extensive involvement in wire fraud, identity theft, and the conspiracy to obstruct a federal investigation earned him a significant federal prison term running concurrently with his sister's sentence. He lost his lucrative career in financial management. His licenses were permanently revoked by the regulatory boards, ensuring he will never touch another client's portfolio for the rest of his life. The man who once stood in a hospital hallway and arrogantly threatened to leverage his wealth to steal my child now possesses absolutely nothing. He is a disgraced, destitute inmate entirely forgotten by the wealthy clients he used to impress. The ledger of his life is morally and financially bankrupt. He traded his loyal wife, his innocent daughter, and his personal freedom to protect a lie, and the market corrected his catastrophic miscalculation with brutal, unforgiving efficiency. I sit by the large bay window of my new home watching the sunset paint the evening sky in vibrant shades of gold and crimson. The air is cool, clean, and carrying the steady promise of a brilliant tomorrow. I did not start this war. I was content to live quietly, to work hard, to raise my daughter with kindness, empathy, and respect. But they made the fatal mistake of confusing my patience for weakness. They believed that a mother's love was a fragile, exploitable vulnerability. They assumed my working-class background made me an easy target for their aristocratic bullying. They learned at the cost of their entire empire that a mother's love is actually the most lethal, uncompromising force in the universe. We are not defined by the bloodlines that try to bind us, or the toxic expectations that try to break us. We are defined by the fires we are willing to walk through to ensure our children never have to burn. Sometimes the only way to cure a toxic family is to burn their secrets to the ground. Have you ever had to become the villain to protect someone you love? Let me know in the comments.